George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
The Earth does not revolve around the sun. McCarthyism goes intergalactic. The Salem witches are at work. And Yuri Gagarin is no longer the first man to orbit the Earth in space, at least according to the Space Foundation, funded by the American Department of Defense. Valentina Tereshkova is not the first woman in space. She's already been airbrushed out of history in Ukraine. And as for Laika, the first dog in space, God knows when they'll send him to the knacker's yard. And it turns out that Hunter Biden's laptop was all true. 51 US intelligence agents perjured themselves and called it Russian disinformation. As a result, those who broke the story were deplatformed, including a newspaper, the New York Post, which was telling the truth whilst the Biden Democratic Party machine and the deep state were all telling lies. What is on Hunter Biden's laptop? Well, I can't, for family viewing reasons, tell or show you everything, but I'm going to tell you and show you enough to establish that the Biden family are criminals, just as Donald Trump said that they were. It's come to something, hasn't it, when Donald Trump was the one telling the truth and the others were telling the lies. Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy ride. It's the mother of all talk shows.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway. The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway. The world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
Well, it looks like there's going to be an early general election in Britain. The government are going to scrap the ill-fated and foolish Fixed-Term Parliaments Act. Next week it will go through Parliament just like that. It hasn't a friend in the world, although the House of Commons was unanimous for it when it was passed. And having cleared that obstacle, what remains to stop Boris Johnson calling an early general election? Certainly not the performance of the leader of the opposition. Boris Johnson, if he calls a khaki election, re-elect me as Winston Churchill revisited, will sweep the boards, he will sweep the country, and the Conservatives will be in for another long 4 or 5 year term. No doubt that will come up in the course of the show, as will Boris Johnson's abject performance in the United Arab Emirates in the last few days. He was in Dubai on his knees in front of the royal dictatorship there, begging them for more oil production. They didn't tell him, or did they, that P&O, a Dubai-owned firm that operates many British ferry services, including the lucrative ferry service across the English Channel, was the very next day going to sack its entire workforce and hire agency labour at knockdown prices with no conditions the very next day at 2 hours' notice. The workers, many of whom had worked there for decades, were given 2 hours to get off the ship. If it had been in France, the crew would have taken over the ship in an act of righteous piracy. Some of the ships would be on fire in the English Channel right now, and the workers would be in command of all P&O's vessels, but the British workforce are not French, or are they? Are they getting there? Will the British trade unions rise up and defend what is the most egregious and large-scale fire and rehire operation since the British Labour Party sacked all of its workers and rehired agency workers in their place? I'm not making that up. One of many reasons why Keir Starmer will be no more just a week or so after a British general election, which I confidently now expect this year, maybe even in the summer of this year. But the main burden of my remarks are, as I signalled at the beginning, Salem went intergalactic when the Space Foundation excised the name of Yuri Gagarin from the annals of interplanetary travel. This brave and beautiful man, who died in 1968, had to be airbrushed from the annals of the space age because when he was alive in 1968, he was Russian. This on top of the cancelling of Dostoevsky and Tchaikovsky and Chinese cats and Sergei and Alexander and their little child Oleg and the dancers from Come Dance With Me and Formula One drivers and brilliant lawn tennis players, and I could go on and on and on, is a sign of the madness to which the so-called Western world, in truth the periphery of Eurasia, where 10% of the people of the world live and only 3% of the world's children live, has gone completely mad. I stopped at a motorway service station today where, quite surprisingly, they've never done it for any other cause or any other war or any other victims, the forecourt had been taken over by people waving large Ukrainian flags. And a group of the local Rotary Club were collecting money in buckets. Even though hundreds of millions of pounds have been donated in cash to the people of Ukraine, houses have been opened all over Europe for them, householders rewarded far more richly than you'd get for opening your house to a homeless British veteran on the streets, because you'd get nothing for that, despite the fact that tens of billions of pounds have been transferred from the taxpayers in the United States and in Europe to the Ukrainian treasury. There was a group of old buffers collecting money in buckets. I stood watching them for 10 minutes. In that 10 minutes, precisely 2 people put money in the bucket. So maybe the public is showing more sense than the authorities, the football authorities, the television channels, the newspapers, the government, the opposition. All of the organs of the British state have erupted in a frenzy of war propaganda, a kind of war psychosis that has not been seen in this country for the best part of 40 years. And I'll come back to that number because I have a different view to some as to why that is the case. But the war propaganda, the cancellation, deplatforming, the defenestration, the sackings, the complete veil of secrecy which has descended over the war in Ukraine so that the official organs can seek to persuade you that Ukraine is winning the war. If only we'll give them more mercenaries, more money, more weapons, Russia will be defeated in the war, is serving nobody's interest, not the taxpayer in the West, not the general public who have a right to know what is happening in the world, and certainly not the Ukrainians, because the truth is, of course, the precise opposite. If Russia had wanted to end this war in the way that Britain and the United States ended the war they launched 19 years ago this very day, I refer, of course, to shock and awe in Iraq. Well, already 200,000 or 300,000 civilians would be dead. There would be scarcely a building left standing. Neither of these two things is true in Ukraine, though how could you know? Because you have been forbidden to see what is actually happening. What you're getting instead is hoax stories and hoax pictures. Pictures from Belgrade, which are said to be from Kharkov. Pictures from Beirut, which are said to be from Lviv. Pictures from anywhere in the world, Baghdad, Yugoslavia, anywhere in the world that we have been at war in the last 20 years are shown to you as pictures from the war in Ukraine, but they are not. And one day you will know the truth. But they want to stop you from knowing the truth for as long as possible to continue this gigantic psyops that they have led you over the cliff as a result of. The truth is that if Russia wanted to end the war, it would already have been ended. Russia does not want to occupy the great cities of Ukraine. It does not want to massacre the civilian population of Ukraine. They were once, for hundreds of years, the same country. Russia has limited war aims, or it did at the start of the war. The longer the war goes on, the more the danger that the war aims will have to begin to change. But the limited demands, as Lavrov put it, were merely for the recognition of the eastern part of the country, the Russian-speaking, ethnically Russian part of the country, to have autonomy. They could have remained within the state of Ukraine. All they wanted was autonomy. Ukraine signed that. France and Germany guaranteed it. The Security Council guaranteed it. All they wanted was for the people of the eastern part of Ukraine not to be slowly massacred, as they have been over the last 8 years. 14,000 of them have been massacred. People constantly say to me, why aren't you trying to stop the war? I've been trying to stop the war for the last 8 years, when most people had averted their eyes away. Most people didn't give a toss because they were the wrong kind of Ukrainians that they were slaughtering there. The black hundreds of the fascist Nazi militias and battalions of the official Ukrainian army that we are arming and funding and propagandizing for were crucifying people, burning them at the stake, torturing people, seizing people as human shields, taking whole villages, towns, even cities like Mariupol hostage, so that their power and their ability to wage a war of attrition against millions of Ukrainians who didn't think like them about the coup in 2014, organized to the nth degree by the United States of America and the European Union, so that they could continue their killing fields in the east of Ukraine. That's all that Russia demanded at the start of the war. And now they are very comfortably in a position to make sure that all of these things happen. As a matter of fact, they're in a position to close the pincer and create a giant cauldron where 100,000 Ukrainian soldiers will have no choice but to surrender, leaving the far west of the country, beyond the river Dnieper, unable to resist any Russian action that took place thereafter. Unless, of course, World War III is going to start and NATO moves in. Well, I don't know anyone the terms being either agreed or imposed. The weapons that we're pouring into Ukraine now will shortly be in the hands of the Russian armed forces. Where's the sense in that? Unless it is your intention to fight to the last drop of Ukrainian blood. The people of Ukraine are being cruelly abused by NATO, for NATO, read the United States of America, who are using them as cannon fodder in a war that can, as I say, only end one way. What of the United States of America? Well, in the run-up to the presidential election, allegedly won by Joe Biden by a handsome margin, a story emerged which polling suggests would have altered the outcome by a clear 10% of the vote or more, which would have meant that Donald Trump was the president of the United States now, and not the quite evidently senile Alzheimer patient Joe Biden. What was that story? That story was that a laptop unbelievably left in a repair shop by the first son of the President of the United States, Hunter Biden is his name, had contained material on it so horrific that Hunter Biden should be in a penitentiary for the rest of his life. The first son of the United States of America is revealed in that laptop as a sick pervert with a taste in child pornography. He is revealed as a sick drug addict, addicted to crack cocaine. So much, so bad. You could say his father's not responsible for the sick practices of his son, but there's other stuff on the laptop too. You see, Hunter Biden was not just up to his neck in vice and Class A drugs. He was up to his neck in business in Ukraine, in Burisma, the oil and gas company in Ukraine, which is where this whole sordid story of the Ukraine begins. People don't want you to know that. They moved mountains to make sure that you did not know that. They banned the newspapers who uncovered the story. They deplatformed them. They took them off Twitter, off Facebook. 51 intelligence officers of the United States, 51, testified that this laptop story was Russian disinformation. That the big guy referred to in documents on the laptop, who had to be satisfied financially in the negotiations between Hunter Biden and the oligarchs of Ukraine. The big guy could not have been the Vice President of the United States, as was Joe Biden, when the coup that overthrew the elected government in Kiev took place. The big guy couldn't have been Joe. Hunter couldn't have been the guy extorting millions of dollars from the oligarchy in Ukraine. This was all Russian disinformation until it wasn't. The New York Times this week published a story epochal in its importance, in which they finally confessed that the suppression of the Hunter Biden laptop story had been wrong, that the material on the laptop had been authentic, that Hunter Biden was a sick sexual criminal, drug addict, and up to his neck in corruption in the Ukraine, and that the whole sick story of the coup and everything that has happened since was ineluctably, inextricably linked to what must now be called the Biden crime family. I've got to tell you that if Americans knew, as they will, slowly but surely, that Donald Trump had been right when he said, Joe Biden is a criminal, and you, the news media, are also criminals for failing to report it. Donald Trump was right. Imagine that. Trump, a passing stranger with the truth. Trump himself, hardly a paragon of virtue either on the sexual front or on the corruption front. Donald Trump was the one telling the truth. The Bidens, who gave you their word as a Biden, were lying. The intelligence community was lying. The deep state in the United States was lying. The Democrats were lying. CNN was lying. The media was lying, and Donald Trump was telling the truth. Just imagine if that story in the run-up to the presidential election had not been suppressed, how different the world would look today. I'll be taking your calls, and I'll be talking to some brave and brilliant people over the next 2.5 hours and more, because this is the mother of all talk shows.
You know, and it's a very, thank you for, you know, I'm a big fan of your show, Gigi. Great debate, great. And I'm Scottish. I'm very passionate about what's happening there, you know. I had a great mom. She was Scottish, Mary McLeod. She taught me well. She taught me well at everything, including golf. I love Scotland, and I love the Scottish food. It's great food. I said to Melania, you know, haggis. Look at that. What's more Scottish than that? Me. I am that haggis. She said, what, thin-skinned and full of crap?
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Well, there's the first poll of the evening. Should Hunter Biden be in jail? A, yes. B, no. It's a simple question, really. You can vote on my Twitter account at George Galloway, on my YouTube channel. And if you're on the YouTube channel, please subscribe to it, or on my Telegram channel. Please follow me on Telegram, t.me/George Galloway. And if you're watching on Facebook, please share with everyone that you are in contact with. My next guest, our first guest, is possibly the bravest man in the world today. He's the man that told us what was really happening whilst walking and talking in the streets of a Kharkov that was at the time tightly in the grip of the black hundreds of which I have spoken, of the people you'll see on videos all over social media right now, torturing people, men, women, even children, in broad daylight, and filming themselves doing it, and proud of the way they are whipping people whom they have tied to a tree, and God knows what happened to those people afterwards. But my first guest, Gonzalo Lira, actually, on camera, told the truth of what was happening and placed the blame squarely where it belongs for the situation in Ukraine. He joins me now from Kharkov in Ukraine, but he can't be on camera. He's a brave man, but he's not a stupid one. But I'm very glad and proud that he's on the mother of all talk shows. Gonzalo Lira, welcome on board the show. Give us an idea of you, if you will, of the current state of play in your city.
Oh, first of all, George, thank you very much for having me on. It's very much appreciated. Thank you. And your kind words, I think that you overstate bravery and certainly intelligence. Because a smart man, would he be in this position? No, I don't think so. So anyway, yeah, I'm in Kharkov. I'm in the center of the city. And yeah, today, as a matter of fact, I did a little tour of it. And it's... the long and short of it is that at this time, we're a little bit over almost 4 weeks into this invasion, 3.5 weeks. And it's clear that the Russians are winning. And the way that they have been conducting this war is more or less what I said at the very beginning of this conflict, which was the Russians don't seek to destroy Ukraine. They seek to capture it whole and as with as little damage as possible given the circumstances. And the other thing, too, is that they are trying to capture the Ukraine army. Now, that might not seem like what they're doing to people who don't understand military matters, but the way that the Russians have been conducting this war, it's clear that their intention is to capture both the country and the Ukrainian armed force. And within the Ukrainian armed force, there are quite frankly, the fascist element. And I do not say that lightly. There are many people who just, accuse anybody that they don't like of being a fascist. I mean, last I heard on Twitter, J.K. Rowling is a fascist because of her opinions on various matters. No, these are actual fascists, and they are proud of it. And these fascists were instrumental in the 2014 coup d'etat. And after 2014, they were supposedly disbanded, but what actually happened was that they were absorbed into the Ukrainian armed forces at all levels, in all units. They weren't discrete units within the Ukrainian armed forces. There are certain battalions, famously the Azov battalion and the Aidan battalion, that are independent units. But for the most part, these fascist elements are spread out throughout the Ukrainian armed forces. And these are the people that the Russians very badly want to take out. They want to preserve the Ukrainian armed force for later, because it's very clear that the Russians have no intention of conquering and absorbing Ukraine. They want it to be an independent state, but simply friendly to them, friendly to Russia. And by the way, my commentary insofar as this conflict is concerned, I have to emphasize this point, if you will allow me. My interest is to make this conflict as short as possible with as little loss of life as possible. And that's why I try to be as realistic as possible, because I think that what happened is that the Ukrainian leadership, the EU and the United States and NATO, they led the Ukrainian people down the garden path, the primrose path of believing that Ukraine would one day join NATO, join the EU, and that once that happened, they would all be rich and happy and it would be a wonderful life. And because of this, they goaded the Russians. The Ukrainian government goaded the Russians, and it got to a point where the Russians realized that no promise made by the West would ever be fulfilled, specifically the Minsk agreements that were signed in 2014 and were never fulfilled. And the Zelensky regime and the previous regime would stretch out and just sort of like ignore and just not do what was supposed to be done vis-a-vis the agreement. And so the Russians realized this on the one hand, and on the other hand, they realized that the Ukrainians, and what is appearing now to be the trigger for this conflict, the Ukrainians seem to have been on the brink of invading the Donbass. And they had amassed their army on the east, right on the contact line. And remember when the United States and Europe kept saying that the Russians were surrounding Ukraine, were amassing troops on the border with Ukraine? Well, it was a weird kind of projection, because that's what the Ukraine armed forces were doing. They were amassing their armies in the east for a final conquest of the breakaway republics of Lugansk and Donetsk. And what happened was that the Russians, in essence, beat them to the punch. And that's why, because they were amassed there on the east, right on the contact line, That's why the Russians have been able to encircle that army, which numbers some 60,000 soldiers. And it's very important to understand these are 60,000 frontline combat troops. They've surrounded them. They're actually in about 4 different cauldrons, they're called, which is basically pockets that are surrounded by Russian forces. And the Russians basically have cut off the major cities, Kiev, Kharkov, Mariupol, Lugansk, Donetsk. They've cut them off. Well, Lugansk and Donetsk are now under control of the Russians, but they've cut off the cities and cut off the armies. There's no longer a centralized defensive strategy by the Ukrainians. And so it's just a matter of time. When you have a divided army and divided defenses, that's what's currently happening. It's just a matter of time before the attacking forces, in this case the Russians, they're going to take over. And by the way, the reason they call this strategy the cauldron, because what they do is they surround a pocket of resistance or a group of soldiers or a city. They surround it and then slowly start turning up the heat, like on a cauldron. And it's a famous strategy that the Russians have employed from the beginning of the 19th century. It's nothing new. It's slow, grinding, methodical. And this is how the Russians are winning this conflict. And what's really interesting is that so many people in the commentariat in the West think that the Russians are losing. And you wonder why, because the Russians are taking over towns. The Russians are advancing troops. And you're trying to understand, why do the very, very smart people in the West think that the Russians are losing? And then you understand why. And it took me a while for me to figure it out. Because we are so used to, over the last 30 years, that when the Americans go to war, how do they go to war? They send their Air Force to completely bombard a city, destroy it, annihilate it. They start with the infrastructure, with the electrical grid, telephony. Then they go after water mains, heating, heating systems, whatnot. They just systematically destroy all of the infrastructure in the city. And this causes enormous damage to the civilian population, which is either killed or left homeless or flees. And once they have softened up, quote unquote, a city like this, which is just basically annihilating the city, then the Americans, or NATO, or call them what you will, the global American empire, the GAE, they roll in essentially a mopping up operation. They've destroyed the city, and then they roll in and take it over. And of course, by that time, there's no resistance whatsoever, and the pockets of resistance are trivial. But the Russians don't fight the war like that. They're not interested in destroying the cities. On the contrary, they want to maintain the cities and minimize civilian casualties as much as they can. What they want to do is to neutralize the opposing armed force. And notice, it's neutralized, not destroy. The Russians are just as happy if somebody surrenders or if an opposing army deserts. They're not trying to kill. They're trying to eliminate the threat that the opposing armed force poses. And so that mentality, frankly, is far more humane. And it makes you realize that the American mode of war that we in the West have become accustomed to over the last 30 years is really despicable. I mean, you start to realize, I am a conservative. Politically, I am conservative. You and I are probably on opposite sides of the spectrum on a whole host of issues. But when I used to hear men of the left, such as yourself, say that, George Bush was a war criminal and Bill Clinton was a war criminal and all the rest of it, I was like, yeah, okay. But comparing the way the Russians carry out a war and comparing it to how the Americans have carried out a war, I stand corrected. I have to fully agree that the American leaders, people like Tony Blair, like George W. Bush, they truly are war criminals. They committed unspeakable atrocities that served no purpose. They were just, it was wanton destruction. Because I'm seeing how the Russians are carrying out the war. I am in the middle of Kharkov, and I am speaking to you over cell phone. I have internet. I have running water. I have sewage. I have heat, which is crucial in Eastern Europe. electricity, of course. I mean, everything is normal because the Russians did not go out to destroy the civilian infrastructure. They are not trying to conquer cities. They're trying to neutralize the opposing armed force. And you realize that this is the civilized way of waging war. I mean, war is by definition violent and barbaric, but there are degrees of barbarism. And this is as humane as possible, the way that they are carrying it out. And then you realize that analysts in the West, since they're so used to this total destruction and annihilation of cities and the complete ruin of the people that are being conquered, then you realize that, yeah, of course, from their point of view, since the Russians are not destroying everything in their path, they're quote unquote losing the war, which is, you know, the situation we're at. Anyway, I've ranted a little bit. Ask me anything.
No, you haven't.
It's
been absolutely riveting, fascinating. May I ask why you're there? Why you're there in Kharkiv?
Ask away.
Please. How did you end up our man in Kharkiv?
What happened? I am from Chile. My accent doesn't make it sound that way. And I grew up, I spent a lot of time in the United States. My father worked in finance, and I went to university in the United States. I went to Dartmouth, and I worked in Hollywood as a writer, and then I published novels, and then got involved into different businesses. And in, 2011? 2012, I met a Ukrainian woman in Germany, because I had some friends in Germany, and I went to visit them, and I was living in Paris at the time. And you know, the usual happened, you know, fell in love. She was the au pair of these acquaintances, and fell in love, and, you know, now we have a couple of kids. Well, they are far away from me at this time. And we came to live here in 2016 because her family is from here. And I thought it would be, you know, nice to live here for a while. And then I had different businesses that I had to attend to in London and Amsterdam. And so this was like a good base of operation while the kids grew up and learned Russian and Ukrainian. And well, this situation arose, and it caught me personally. I was in Kiev. I went out to Kiev on some trivial business, just some residency stuff that I had to take care of. And I was supposed to be there for 2 nights, and I arrived the day before the invasion. So I had front row seats to that. And insofar as the invasion, I've had this hobby of being a YouTuber, and I was winding it down last year. Late last year, I was just winding it down because, you know, I'd had a good run. It was fun. But what happened was that I started reporting on what was going on in Kiev. And I would go up and down Kreshchatyk Avenue, videotaping myself and showing the sights as the war developed. And what I noticed early on that made me no friends among many people was that the Zelensky regime was handing out firearms willy-nilly to the population. In the end, they distributed something like 10,000 weapons. And at the time, I thought that this was exceedingly dangerous because you don't know who you're giving these weapons to. And these civilians who are going to use these weapons, they don't know how to use them, because it's not enough to know how to shoot a gun. You have to know how to move with as a team. You know, I mean, there's a reason that soldiers train. It's not just picking up a gun and aiming and shooting. You have to know how to move, know how to react so that you are effective and don't injure yourself or other people. And so I thought it was crazy. And I said that criminals were going to get these weapons, and lo and behold, they got them. And I witnessed how there were shootouts in Kiev. I witnessed them, not that I saw them, I heard them. I would hear, automatic fire in downtown Kiev, and the distance of it was not more than, say, 250 meters to 500 meters on the outside, at a time when it was known that the closest Russian fighters were 30, 40 kilometers away. So it was obvious that what was happening was that these weapons fell into the hands of criminals, as has been later confirmed. And these criminals started using them on the civilian population, on each other, settling scores and whatnot. And that's why I started paying attention to the Zelensky regime, because as a foreigner in Ukraine, as a foreigner in any country, quite frankly, I think it's wrong for a foreigner to be discussing and having an opinion about the local governance. After all, you're a guest. And so my thinking has been always like, when I go to somebody's house as a guest, I don't tell them, to change the wallpaper or why do they have the furniture the way that they do. It's their business. And if I like it or don't like it, I have to just keep it to myself. That's always been my attitude. And so insofar as the Ukrainian political situation is concerned, I never had an opinion, and I never really paid attention to it deliberately, so that I would never fall into this trap of having an opinion where I'm a guest and not a citizen, where as a resident, I'm allowed certain privileges, but I'm not able to vote, I'm not able to change, and I shouldn't. I mean, that's me, that's my opinion, or the way I think one ought to handle oneself as a guest in the country. But when the invasion happened, I started paying attention to the Zelensky regime for the first time. And I started doing some digging on the Zelensky regime. And I realized that Zelensky himself is an actor, and he is literally a puppet. He was put into position by a Ukrainian, Israeli, Cypriot oligarch by the name of Igor Kolomoisky, who is a nasty character. This oligarch has basically created a television program called Servant of the People and cast Zelensky as the lead, and artificially inflated this television program by bribing people and getting a lot of publicity for this show, even though the show in and of itself is fairly mediocre. But it got a lot of people's attention, and Zelensky as a puppet was positioned by Kolomoisky and his various associates in the entertainment industry, because Kolomoisky was the owner or principal owner of 1+1 Media, which is the largest media company in Ukraine. And they positioned Zelensky to be this figure, because in the television show, the Zelensky president of the TV show wants to join the EU and wants to join NATO and sells the dream that Ukraine will be wonderful and will end the corruption in Ukraine if this happens. And so Zelensky is, in the TV show, he was like the ideal candidate. And so this was transitioned into reality. They even made a political party called Servant of the People to support Zelensky's candidacy. And he won the election by basically lying to the people and telling them that he would get them to the EU, he would solve the corruption problems, which are very serious in Ukraine. He sold them a bill of goods that he could not possibly deliver. And people, unfortunately, bought this story and they elected him. And quite quickly, he started acting despotically. One of the measures that he did was that he banned television channels that were critical of him or of his regime. He banned 4 of them, as a matter of fact, where before he had said that the Russian language should be allowed and it was wrong to prohibit the Russian language. Once he became president, he outlawed the Russian language. And it was very clear that Kolomoisky, the oligarch, he was the man, along with other oligarchs, who had funded the Azov battalion and other far-right neo-Nazi movements in Ukraine that had been instrumental in the 2014 Maidan coup. And it's very odd.
This is let me stop you there. Yeah, it's more than odd. It is grotesque that the fascists should be being funded by a Ukrainian oligarch who is Jewish. But in the Zelensky speech to the Knesset, let me draw your attention to a very different Israeli point of view. Caroline Glick, an Israeli writer and editor, said this evening after Zelensky's speech to the Knesset, and I'm quoting her. The claim by Zelensky that the Ukrainians were righteous Gentiles who tried to protect us from the Holocaust is a revolting piece of historical revisionism. She said that the Jews in Ukraine were massacred not in Poland, but in Ukraine and by their neighbors. The truth of the matter is that a significant, not the majority, a significant part of particularly Western Ukraine has historically been anti-Semitic to its core and fell upon its own Jewish population and massacred them even before the SS trains arrived to take them to the death camps. And I take my hat off to Caroline Glick this evening. She called out Zelensky's lies that somehow Nazism and fascism and anti-Semitism are somehow alien to the nationalist forces in Ukraine, when the absolute opposite is the truth. Am I right?
George, you're absolutely right. And George, can I ask you something? What kind of a man can Zelensky possibly be if he himself is Jewish and he is intimately associated with such figures as these? I mean, I have to ask somebody here. What do you think of this? I mean, I would be revolted. I could not live with myself on a level of conscience.
Well, I couldn't either. Alas, we've run out of time, Gonzalo. Stay safe. You're a very brave and smart man, whatever you say, however you answer that. I'm certain, as so are the viewers, I'm sure, who are, by the way, at record numbers right now, consider you to be one of the heroes of this dreadful situation. Gonzalo Lira in Kharkiv. The poll is quite staggering. In less than 1 hour, 6,100 people have voted. Should Hunter Biden be in jail? On Twitter, yes, 91%, no, 9%. I hope you're watching, or at least your carer is watching for you, Joe Biden. On YouTube, yes, 95%, no, 5%. On Telegram, yes, 98%, no, 2%. Tell him that when you go to give him his porridge in the morning, Mrs. Carer in the White House. Now let me go to the first question of the evening. On this day in 2016, Barack Obama became the first U.S. president to visit Cuba since 1928. Who was that? A. Herbert Hoover, B. Calvin Coolidge, C. Teddy Roosevelt. Who was the last president before Obama to visit Cuba in 1928? I'll be right back.
You have to remember back in 2002, 2003, there was a wish by George Bush for regime change. That's what was driving him. Nothing to do with weapons of mass destruction, which of course didn't exist in Iraq. So they had to construct some sort of formula, some sort of cover story in order to persuade the British public that intervention in Iraq was right. Now, David Kelly, as an expert in weapons of mass destruction, knew that this was untrue. He knew that there were probably no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq.
That was a guy that could have brought down the whole system.
I reckon you're chaff. You've been thrown up to divert our probing.
The Foreign Affairs Select Committee, that parliamentarian briefing, I think that was an indignity to him.
We saw it on the news, and my very first thought was shock. Oh my God, you know, this man is in the eye of the media hurricane. He should be protected by that, at least.
You've got blood on your hands, Prime Minister. Are you going to resign over this?
I don't know the details of how Lord Hutton happened to be selected, but what was certainly the case is that he was the right kind of judge to use from the point of view of Downing Street and the intelligence services as well.
Of the 21 days of hearing, only one half of one day was spent on discussing the forensic aspects. That is disgusting.
We were given the Hutton report the day before it was published. But actually what happened was he went too far.
The events of 2003 were disgraceful ones in this country's history, and it's unfinished business. Those responsible for an illegal war, those responsible for the death of David Kelly, have not been brought to justice. There's been no inquest into David Kelly's death. There needs to be one. We need to make sure that those who behaved in a reprehensible way in 2003 are finally brought to book.
Global higher education with one of the world's best-known iconoclasts. The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
The answer was Calvin Coolidge, though as Dorothy Parker would say, how could they tell? Now, on the Killing Kelly, this is, I say, the 19th anniversary today of the Bush and Blair invasion, which became an invasion and occupation of Iraq, which continues until this day. It's not ancient history, you know, until this day. And, of course, ISIS and Al-Qaeda then cascaded all over the world. Now, my film, Killing Kelly, fits right in at the center of the Iraq war story. And the Iraq war story fits right into the center of where we are now in 2022 in the world. You can vote on the Hunter Biden poll on my Twitter feed, on my YouTube, and on my Telegram. Lynn says Hunter Biden should be in the same jail cell that Epstein didn't kill himself in. Very good, Lynn. And Dayan System says, excellent intro, George. Laughed a lot at the Trump intro. I'm a Trumper. If it weren't for Trump, I'd still be blind. Gonzalo Lira is brave and brilliant. Thank you for sharing Gonzalo with us at this heartbreaking time. And Chris in Hertfordshire says, have you noticed the pointless virtue signalling, have I, by celebrities and our local council? Crocodile tears on TV and my local council have lit up our local high street in blue and yellow lights. Sing hallelujah. Most local councils have given up lighting their high streets at all. Anwar says we feel very, very sad for the Ukrainian children, women and elderly who are suffering now in this cruel combat. Both sides have become egoistic and appreciate the patience if the EU and NATO countries not fuel the crisis. Let's take Simon in London on the Ukraine issue. Go ahead, Simon.
How you doing, George? You okay, mate?
All good. Nice to hear from you. What would you like to say?
Well, I've been following this Ukraine crisis since the Orange Revolution began in 2004, so I was quite quick to realise, especially coming off the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, that the Western government and the MSN line on this was nothing more, pardon my French, than a crock of steaming manure. However, here's something that nobody seems to talk about. You've talked about it on your show, of course, and something that needs to serve as a cautionary tale. Effectively, this entire Ukrainian crisis needs to serve as a cautionary tale for those Scottish independence enthusiasts who think it's a good idea to separate themselves from the UK. In Ukraine, the government have blamed all their poor performances. I mean, they're in a huge amount of debt to the IMF, I believe, as well. All their failings, all their financial disasters on Russia, and effectively scapegoated Russians for years since this entire debacle began. Even before the Maidan tragedy of 2014 and the US-backed coup, there was a bitter hatred towards Russians through false propaganda made up and generated by the Ukrainian government. And it was racial, ethnic discrimination against the Russians and the arming of the Nazi militias that resulted in Russia, who I don't blame, taking an action of enough is enough stance and carrying out this operation. Now, I understand that Nicola Sturgeon backs this war, but why should I be surprised? This SNP, a deeply, deeply nationalistic party, something that even your bitter rival David Stocky has pointed out, ignoring their Nazi ties from the past, which you covered on your show previously, to draw parallels, just like the Nazis that blame the Jews for all their problems, like the Ukrainians blame the Russians for all their problems. The SNP, an SNP in Scotland seems to blame everything on the English for all their problems, as I said. And the SNP used the twisted soul tire like the Nazis used the swastika, and I'm rather afraid that the tragedy that's currently unfolding in Ukraine will no doubt open doors for something similar to happen in Scotland. And the UK government really needs to use their head on this, because effectively they're setting themselves up for the fall through backing Ukraine in this way, because similar tactics could easily be used by the EU to take control of Scotland. And as you know, you pointed out quite rightly several times in your show, the EU absolutely hate us for Brexit. Do you honestly think that this is not the end? As I said, they despise us, George.
Well, look, I don't want to compare directly the fascism and the ultra nationalism of significant sections of the Ukrainian polity with the SNP. I think that would be rather extreme. But nationalism is a very bad idea. In developed countries, nationalism never does any good. In countries that are not actually occupied and oppressed by other countries, it is not a good idea to fan the flames of nationalism. And the Yugoslav situation and many, many others are startling testimony to that. The idea that you can invent a scapegoat is a nationalist thing. The Nazis were, of course, nationalists, and they othered the Jewish population, but not just actually the Jewish population, but the Slavic populations also, as subhumans, Untermensch, that they had every justification for either annihilating or for working to death or for stealing their land and exploiting it. Now, this kind of mentality is common to all of the nationalist forces that I have encountered in the developed world over my lifetime. It's certainly true in the Ukraine. In fact, as the recent statement, which I commend to everyone, by the Russian Communist Party on this crisis, you can find it on my Twitter feed, powerfully makes clear and with tremendous clarity the best period in which the Ukraine, with its current boundaries, was the period of Soviet power, when heavy industry, when extractive industry and manufacturing industry was at its peak in the Ukraine. The encouragement of Ukrainian language and culture, the peak of that was during the Soviet period. Before the Soviet Union, of course, much of Ukraine was in Poland, and much of Ukraine was regarded as the borderland of Russia. It was the Soviet period that gave modern Ukraine its boundaries and its cultural and political consciousness as a people. How's that for irony? That's all I can say. Anyway, in the next hour, after the news with Elliot King, we've got Eisa Ali, a journalist and broadcaster, talking Middle Eastern politics with a particular emphasis on Iran. But anyway, it's news time now, and I've got a chance for a cup of tea properly. Elliot King, take it away.
Turkey's foreign minister, who is mediating peace talks between Ukraine and Russia, has said the two sides are close to an agreement. Mevlut Cavusoglu told the AFP news agency it is not an easy thing to come to terms with while the war is still going on, while civilians are killed. But he added, "We see that the parties are close to an agreement." Cavusoglu visited Russia and Ukraine this week, as Turkey has strong bonds with the two sides. He added that Turkey was in contact with the negotiating teams but refused to speak about the details of the talks. The two sides are negotiating on 6 key points, including Ukraine's neutrality, disarmament and security guarantees, the so-called denazification of the country and the removal of obstacles on the use of the Russian language in Ukraine. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has been criticised for comparing the struggles of Ukrainians fighting Russian invasion to people in Britain voting for Brexit. In a speech, he said Britons, like Ukrainians, had the instinct to choose freedom and cited the 2016 vote to leave the EU as a recent example. The comments have caused anger among politicians both in the UK and Europe. Donald Tusk, the former president of the European Council, called the comments offensive. Conservative peer Lord Barwell said voting in a referendum was not in any way comparable with risking your life in a war. However, Chancellor Rishi Sunak defended the Prime Minister, saying the two events were comparable. He said people will make up their own minds, but I certainly don't think those two situations are directly analogous. I don't think he does either. A memo sent across Whitehall before P&O Cruises sacked 800 of its staff tried to justify the decision, a newspaper report has claimed. The document said the company's now widely condemned move would ensure it remains a key player in the UK market for years to come through restructuring, the Sunday Times has said. Apparently written by a senior official, it talked about the re-employment of staff on the new terms and conditions and mentioned agency staff. I added that it would align P&O Ferries with other companies which had undertaken a large reduction in staff. Transport Secretary Grant Shapps received a copy and officials in his department knew of the redundancies on Wednesday, a day before the dismissals went ahead, the newspaper added. 6 people have been killed and 10 others seriously injured after a car driven at high speed slammed into a group of carnival performers in Belgium, says authorities. The vehicle hit people who had gathered at dawn on Sunday for the start of parade celebrations in the village of Strepu-Bakujeni, which is just about 30 miles south of Brussels. The vehicle hit people who had gathered at dawn on Sunday for the start of a parade celebration in the village of Strepu-Bakujeni, which is about 30 miles south of Brussels. The mayor of the neighbouring town of La Louvière, Jacques Gobert, told a local radio station a car drove from the back at high speed. We have a few dozen injured and unfortunately 7 more people have been killed. The driver of the vehicle and a second person who were arrested when it came to a halt. Officers have denied media reports that the car may have been chased by police before the crash, and the incident did not appear to be a terror attack, according to prosecutors. The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge have arrived in Belize as demonstrations over land rights forced them to cancel their first big engagement of their tour. On Friday, it was announced that the royal couple would not be visiting a cacao farm in the village of Indian Creek on Sunday morning after protests from villagers. They were demonstrating after they were told the couple's helicopter would be landing on their football pitch. The village is also in a land dispute relating to ancestral land with Fauna and Flora International, a conservation group of which Prince William is patron. The state-owned oil giant Saudi Aramco plans to sharply increase the amount of its invests in energy production after it reported a doubling of profits in 2021. The firm aims to boost output significantly over the next 5 years. Energy prices have soared in recent months as demand has outstripped supplies of oil and gas. The war in Ukraine and a reluctancy to rely on Russia for energy has added that the pressure to find additional sources of energy. Saudi Aramco's move is likely to be welcomed by political leaders worried about the impact of high energy prices, although the boost to investment is aimed at increasing output over the course of the next 5 to 8 years. And finally, it's the game you may have never heard of, which is sweeping across the United States. It's had its origins 57 years ago when 3 fathers vacationing on an island near Seattle had a mini rebellion on their hands. Their kids were bored and they needed a summertime activity to keep them entertained. So the dads Joel Pritchard, Bill Bell and Barney McCallum got creative. They used the items at their disposal, including some ping pong bats, an old badminton court and a perforated plastic ball, and invented a new game for their kids to play, which that was called pickleball. With that, pickleball was born. From that humble start, the game has gradually evolved into a sport with official rules and better equipment. An estimated 4.8 million people in the US now play pickleball. Participation has increased by 39.3% in the past 2 years, making it the country's fastest growing sport, according to Laura Gaynor, a marketing consultant for the USA Pickleball Association, the sport's national governing body. There's a professional pickleball tour with some matches airing on ESPN. Pickleball aficionados are pushing for it to be included in the Olympics. It has apparently captivated such celebrities as talk show host Ellen DeGeneres, actor Leonardo DiCaprio, and philanthropist Bill Gates. The sport is basically a mashup of tennis, ping pong and badminton that can be played indoors or outdoors, single players or in pairs on a court the same size as a double badminton court but with a lower net. Are we likely to see pickleball at the next Olympics in Paris in 2 years' time? Well, if synchronised swimming and skateboarding can be included, why not? That's your Moats News. I'm Elliot King.
George Galloway and the mother of all talk shows. Join us at the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees.
You are indeed watching the mother of all talk shows, the Open University of the airwaves. We have a record number of viewers right at this point in time. In the course of last week, more than 2 million people watched all or part of last Sunday and last Wednesday's Moats Extra. If we include tonight's audience, and tonight's audience looks like it's going to be a record, then 3 shows in 7 days will have at least 3 million viewers from all over the world. And then you add the podcast, details of which will no doubt be coming up later, where we are in the charts almost everywhere. Why do I say that? Not to blow my own trumpet, though I do say this is a wonderful, wonderful show, but because it demonstrates the absolute hunger, ravishing hunger, for a different point of view, for the other side of the story. That's what happens, you see. The book they tried to ban always goes to the top of the bestseller list. That which is forbidden to people becomes more attractive to people. That's why the decisions made by governments across the West and their big tech auxiliaries to shut people down, deplatform them, will never work because, as I keep saying, this is not 1952, it's not even 2002, it's 2022, and people find the way to get the access to the point of view which they can tell is being denied to them, and if it's being denied to them, it's almost certainly for nefarious reasons. And when we have a state where lying and cheating and the very antithesis of all the values claimed by the societies that are doing the banning, the lying, the cheating, well, what are people supposed to do other than seek out alternative points of view? Never forget, the Hunter Biden laptop story was true. Never forget that. And never forget the lying liars who told you that it wasn't. I'm not a Donald Trump fan, but I saw footage of him just getting on an aircraft, where he said, "I'm telling you, Joe Biden is a criminal." And you know what he said? "You're also a criminal for refusing to report it." Boy, what a vindication the New York Times, of all people, has been to old Donald. Should Hunter Biden be in jail? You can vote on my Twitter feed, on my YouTube, and on my Telegram channel. But of course, it's not just Ukraine. The Middle East, where 19 years ago this day, George Bush and Tony Blair committed the ultimate crime, the crime of preemptive war, of a war of aggression, as defined by the Nuremberg Tribunal as the ultimate crime. Anyone want to put them on trial? Oh no, they want to put Vladimir Putin on trial. The very same people that committed the ultimate crime 19 years ago this day when they invaded and then occupied Iraq. An invasion and occupation which hasn't ended yet, 19 years later. One man who knows the whole region, inside out, back to front, top to bottom, is my good friend Eisa Ali, who joins us now on the mother of all talk shows. Eisa, wonderful to see you again. Let's start in Iraq. 19 years ago, shock and awe was unleashed on the people of Iraq to return the country to liberty and progress. How did it all work out?
Firstly, George, congratulations on the record-breaking numbers that you're receiving on this really much-needed show. I think it is, as you said, a consequence of the Iraq War, actually, a time when we saw millions of people. I was just a young man back then. I must have been around 19 years old, on the streets of London marching with everyone else. Millions, literally millions of people. I was on Park Lane walking in the other direction. For hours, people were coming in this direction opposite me. At least 4 or 5 million. I got home that night and the BBC told me there were 50,000 people in London protesting. I knew at that point something wasn't right with the media, and then all the lies that we heard from Tony Blair and George Bush. Funnily enough, in your introduction, you mentioned, war crimes and international courts. The United States have a principle that if any of their politicians are ever taken to The Hague for war crimes, the United States will simply invade the Netherlands. So it just goes to show who the rogue states really are in this day and age. And as you said, in your question to me about Iraq, we saw just over 2 years ago the illegal murders of not only Haj Qasem Soleimani, but Abu Mahdi Mohandes, the leader of the Iraqi Hashd al-Sha'bi. And as a result of those killings, the Iraqi parliament voted to expel the Americans, to expel the occupation. The Americans, in return, threatened that they would take Iraq's oil money, which is held at the Federal Reserve Bank, and it's held, much of it in New York, I believe, and would essentially bankrupt the country. We've seen that kind of financial piracy taking place, with Russia losing over 600 billion of its reserves overnight, causing shockwaves all the way to Beijing, no doubt. And so we see the kind of lawlessness that the Americans, through multiple presidencies, whether it's Bush, Obama, or Trump, and now Biden, throwing international law in the air, ignoring the will of the people of Iraq and elsewhere. And really the people of Iraq want to be free of occupation. And they fought an insurgency for, close to a decade. And since then, there's been much political agitation, despite the American attempts, of course, to try to manipulate the political situation there, to try to bribe their way through the situation and to try to get their quislings to prolong their stay. But I believe it's only a matter of time until the Americans withdraw physically, although, of course, their meddling hands will continue until they are taught a lesson.
Let's move next door to Iran. The last time I spoke to you, we were very hopeful that the Vienna talks had been successful, that the Iran nuclear deal, like Humpty Dumpty wasn't, had been put back together again after Donald Trump broke it and then killed the leaders to whom you referred. We thought that a kind of normalcy would return. But since I last spoke to you, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard landed several high-powered missiles on the compound of the American consulate in Erbil. The United States felt unable to respond to that themselves. and the whole thing seems to have been put on hold. What can you tell us?
I think eventually there will be some kind of deal. It would appear that as far as the Iranians are concerned, that those missile attacks were aimed at the Israelis. We know that for many, many decades, going back to the 1950s, probably beyond as well, the Israelis have had a presence in Iraqi Kurdistan, shall we say, or the Kurdish regions of Iraq, close ties to those leaders there. And that only intensified since 2003. And so 2 Iranian military officials were killed in Syria by an Israeli airstrike. And, George, you'll know better than anyone. The Iranians, the Syrians, the Lebanese, they keep getting hit in Syria by these airstrikes. There hasn't been much of a response, and I think the Iranians reached a point where enough is enough. They had to strike back and send a message, and they did so, as you said, on that attack. It's still unclear whether there was an attack on the American compound itself or right next to it, but it appears that in any case, the attack was definitely aimed at Mossad or their bases in the region, and perhaps that's the American excuse not to retaliate and get themselves embroiled, that they've kind of, in a way, said, well, it wasn't really us, it's the Israelis, let them deal with it. Perhaps the Americans are sick and tired of the Israelis giving them problems in the region, who knows? But I think it's interesting, as you said, it was the IRGC. There is an internal debate in Iran about this deal, right? There are those who think that, why should we return to the negotiating table? Why should we accept a deal, stop our own, sovereign rights to a nuclear program, only for someone to come along in the next few years and say Donald Trump again, maybe, and tear the whole thing up again? And because I don't think there are those guarantees, there are many in Iran who say, well, we shouldn't enter into this deal. And perhaps, speculation on my part, for those parties and those constituencies, perhaps the deal breaking up isn't the biggest tragedy in the world. And for many of them, they would say Iran has faced the biggest sanctions, the hardest sanctions. Whatever Russia's going through now, Iran's been going through that for since the revolution, but at least the last few years. So we don't need the international system, is that perspective. But of course, you have the government of President Raisi now, of course, who's followed from President Rouhani and would like to get this deal done. I still think there will be a deal. I think the Americans realize, and Biden realizes that, going into midterms and then eventually another presidential election with this type of situation on the global stage, inflation, higher fuel prices and so on, is a surefire way to get battered at the elections.
Only time for one more, but we could talk about Lebanon, we could talk about Syria, but I've only time to talk with you about Yemen. People don't seem to know, maybe they don't want to know, maybe they've merely averted their eyes, that right at the same time as there is a war in Ukraine, there is a war that's been going on for nearly 8 years in Yemen, in which both Britain and the United States are deeply, deeply involved. And it is a war between Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, in both of which countries Boris Johnson was on his knees just this week, and the poorest people in the entire Middle East, one of the poorest people in the world, in Yemen, who have been pulverized and slaughtered by high-intensity bombing for all these years, yet nobody seems to really care about it.
Absolutely. The situation in Yemen has highlighted exactly how hypocritical and, frankly speaking, racist much of the media is, much of the political establishment is, and many people are, in fact, in the West. But interestingly enough, despite everything the people of Yemen have gone through, they are, of course, I would say the most oppressed people in the world, the poorest people in the world. They're also the bravest and most steadfast people that I've ever come across, met personally, and even, of course, heard about on a political sense. They've got the whole world against them, more or less. Israel is involved in that war. Saudi Arabia, as you've mentioned, and the Emirates. the Americans and the British are in the command centers leading this war. It's not just supplying weapons. Of course, the Saudis couldn't organize a drink up in a brewery, I think is the polite term. These guys couldn't organize a war. It's the American and British so-called military advisors who are running this morbid show. And yet they've not only not managed to really get anywhere, the Yemenis are consistently handing the backsides of the Saudi soldiers to them, or their mercenaries, bombing targets in Saudi itself, launching quite sophisticated strikes actually against the UAE and against Saudi itself. And I think on that front as well, there will have to be at some point, if Mohammed bin Salman isn't completely stupid and isn't a complete madman, although it could be argued he is, he'll have to come and accept that there has to be some kind of political solution and some kind of peace made, because the Yemeni people simply will not give in. But it is heartbreaking. You know, there are tens of millions of people at risk of famine, of cholera, starvation. And yet it seems the world just turns its eyes away. It views those people as less than complete, less than human. But of course, there are many people who do have that love and care for Yemeni people, and many charities doing great work out there. And so, you know, it's important that we don't get too negative in these circumstances and too frustrated, because yes, the rest of the world is hypocritical. There is a lot of double standards in how these different conflicts are viewed. But at the same time, there's also a lot to be positive about. And again, the conflict in Yemen has broken all of these, if you will, these fault lines, these geopolitical fault lines down, and really exposed many of these countries for who they are.
Well, Sheikh Zayed, the late ruler of the United Arab Emirates, whom I knew well and met many times, said to me once, vis-a-vis Iraq, all wars have to end sometime. The Arabs, he said, have been fighting each other for millennia, but all wars have to end sometime. What did you think when you saw President Bashar al-Assad of Syria meeting the rulers of the United Arab Emirates, who tried mightily to destroy the Syrian Arab Republic over the last decade?
I think this is a reflection of, firstly, the loss of these Arab Gulf countries, or these Persian Gulf countries, should I say, but the Arab rulers of them, who have been for many years trying to overthrow Bashar al-Assad. But interestingly enough, in that time, there's been a split amongst the Gulf. So you've got the Qataris going up against the Saudis and the Emiratis. And the Qataris, in general, very vaguely, have played a more positive role. But in Syria, it would appear that they've been trying to stir up the rebels again, and the kind of terrorist groups who are in Idlib and so on. And maybe Bashar is sending them a message by saying, it's okay, I'll just go to your neighbors and your enemies for those reconstruction funds. And it is, you know, it's sickening for many people, many Syrians, no doubt, to see that the people who essentially bankrolled the destruction of their country are now welcoming their leader. But, you know, this is the reality of politics, of realpolitik. I mean, we've just seen a couple of weeks ago the Russians backing the Emirates on that resolution to do with Yemen. And it's really kind of disappointing for many people to see that. On the other hand, I was speaking to somebody from Yemen the other day, and he was saying, well, a lot of the weapons that the resistance and the Houthis and other groups have are Russian weapons. So, you know, all of this politics is very, very unfortunate. But it would appear to me that it's a sign that Syria was successful in getting rid of the attempt against its country. But these leaders, these Emiratis and others, need to follow it up with action. They need to fund reconstruction efforts and get Syria back to where it was, which really is a jewel of the Levant and a jewel of the Middle East.
Amen. Thank you very much indeed for that, Eisa Ali. Now, my second question of the evening. In this week, in 1963, John Profumo denied he had an affair with a young model. Who was she? A. Mandy Rice Davis, B. Fifi LaRue, or C. Christine Keeler? Answer after the break.
hi, George. The deep state, we mentioned it before. So rather than fear-mongering that everything that's going on at the moment with the COVID, the wars, blah, 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 why aren't we all addressing the deep state rather than this fear-mongering that's going over and over again?
How do you address it?
What I'm trying to get across, and hopefully your listeners will understand this, there is a deep state at work, and you know that.
Everybody knows that. That's a statement of the bleeding obvious.
So let's do something about that, rather than rattling and rolling about the...
Give us a lead. Be our leader. Be our leader, Del.
Who are the deep states?
Yeah.
Oh, what a brilliant question. Those that are all over us. And what should we do about them? We should make them accountable.
I'm just trying to work out whether you're in the territory of shape-shifting lizards, or you're talking about MI5 and MI6.
Please don't turn it into a circus, George. You know full well what's going on, and please don't
I do. I'm just struggling to get from you what it is we should be doing about them. What should I do about MI5 and MI6? And how should I do it?
Just stand up and go, there's something inherently wrong here. And
there's something really wrong here. There you are. I've sorted it, Del. Thanks for the call.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
And the answer, of course, at least for those done certain as, was Christine Keeler, though Fifi LaRue sounds interesting. Let's go to Richard in Manchester. Go ahead, Richard.
Oh, good evening, George. Thank you very much indeed, sir. I'm absolutely buzzing here. We fought for the last 5-6 years to get out of Europe, EU, under the control of Soros and Blair and all these people that are in there that are against democracy is the only word. You yourself, George, you suffered under this lot by being fired by Blair and then his henchman Campbell and so on, and they, excuse the language, got rid of you out of the system. That has been going on.
I'm almost 20 years out the system, though I did win 2 famous election victories against them.
I know. I know, but you have had to fight on your own virtually, George.
Oh, my goodness.
And
I could show you my scars, Rich.
You've been fighting a financial machine that is, wow. It's just there all the time. Billions and billions of people's hands who are using it very, very badly. The last one, of course, is Sturgeon, and we've got to beat her to stop her from getting us back into the EU, because that is what all this fight is about. And to think that the Iraq war and Blair, he went to America and Bush was draining, and he said, you know, and he told him, he said, don't worry, he said, I will spin this war to the world. You don't need to worry, George, we're going to war. And then when it was all over in a few weeks, the general said, we're not going into Afghanistan. And Blair said, yes, we bloody well are. You can get your money in there. And for the last 20 years, we've been at war. Who's talking about this wonderful man called Blair? He's a warmonger, and he should be in The Hague, George.
I mean, Richard, to put a tin hat on it, him and Gordon Brown are both demanding a war crimes tribunal like Nuremberg for the Russian president. I mean, the lack of self-consciousness is simply staggering, and none of the mainstream journalists, when they say that, ask, well, what about Iraq? What about the fact that you illegally invaded Iraq and you devastated it, and the consequences are still being felt today? But Rich, I want to ask you something. You and I were both big supporters of Brexit, and I don't resile from it at all. I'll go to my grave proud of the role I played in the fight for Brexit. But it seems it seems that there are a lot of people who supported us on Brexit, wanted to end our dependence on the European Union, only for us to become dependent on the United States of America. I want us to be independent, full stop, independent of the EU and independent of Joe Biden.
Exactly, but you know, that's a big thing when you've got trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars against you. You've got the Clinton crime family, you've got Obama, you've got all the people in the White House, Pelosi, she's nearly dead when she's talking, and these people are controlling the world now, George, and I'd love to sit and talk to you for hours about this, because it's got to be known that you said it tonight 3 times. The President, Trump, was absolutely correct. Babalinsky, who was a good friend of Biden's son, he came on here and he spent days and weeks telling us this is a load of corrupt families that are dealing here in Ukraine and everywhere else. It's all been highlighted, and I said to my son-in-law, they won't let President Trump serve another term, and that's what they did. And Hillary Clinton is responsible for Julian Assange being where he is, and she should be incarcerated with Blair. And I know I'm going on a bit, George, but to me, this is so exciting.
Powerful.
If you know, the New York Times come out and then they can get some great lawyers on this, and Giuliani was one of them who really came to the fore on it. I followed this like you. I followed it like, wow, this is right. If we could get President Trump, along with whichever government was in England, to do a great big trillion dollar deal, it was good for us all. But they wouldn't let us. Joe Biden come on and use the Irish problem as an excuse to say that we can't deal with Britain anymore. What a shock. But I tell you what, we're proving them wrong. And all these people that Blair is employing or Soros is employing to go to Brussels and to try to get us back in the EU. Do you know what, George? I'll come in the front line with you and we'll have a go at them all, and let's get millions on the streets out of the 17.4 million. Because if they do that to us, that's wrong.
Richard, very powerful indeed. Thank you very much indeed. The poll is headed for a record, if it isn't already at a record. Should Hunter Biden be in jail? 8,500 people have voted. You've still got 25 minutes to vote. Anwar, we've done that. Fernando says, hello from the tyrant state of Canada. I'm sorry to say, that's not far wrong. And Mahmoud says, I like you, George, but I don't think the Russians are behaving different than the Americans in this war. Of course, you were listening to a man who's actually there in the middle of the war earlier, Mahmoud. Irish Robbie said, today on RT, I read that the World Food Programme was blaming Russia for not allowing vital provisions into civilian populations of besieged cities in Ukraine. RT didn't deny this, but countered that Ukraine was preventing people from travelling from those cities to Russia. George, in your opinion, is there such a thing as a justifiable war crime? No, definitely not. James Stevens says, it's come to my notice that Stoltenberg was trying to pressure the Chinese to stop support for Russia. The Chinese reminded him that NATO had bombed the Chinese embassy in Belgrade during its bombing of Serbia. That's from James Stevens. I had to laugh when I saw that Boris Johnson had warned China. They should have answered in the words of Deng Xiaoping to a British official over the issue of Hong Kong. The days when China can be ordered around by foreigners is gone forever. That would have been my answer. Let's go to Washington, D.C. and talk with John. We can't. Let's go to David in Yorkshire instead. It's a shorter distance. Go on, David.
Hi, George. All right?
All right, sir. Nice to hear from you.
Yeah, lovely to hear from you. Yeah, quickly, I've got a suggestion. I've been researching the Ukrainian situation quite deeply, the oligarchs, Zelensky, how we got into power, and, you know, right up to the Azov Battalion and the history of that. I've come up with a conclusion which I'd like to put forward as a suggestion to you, and something that I'd like to consider and maybe give feedback to the audience. And that would
go
be,
ahead.
Would it be possible of you to consider that because globalism has been kind of on the agenda in lots of ways and in lots of countries, do you think at all it would be possible that the Ukrainian Azov Battalion and the nationalists in that country are being sacrificed by the globalists, because the nationalists, and I would see nationalism as being one of the major problems and hold-ups in globalism moving forward?
I think that the Azov Battalion, the right sector, the alphabet soup of fascism in Ukraine will definitely be crushed. Those that are not crushed will escape from Ukraine and will turn up on a high street near you, maybe with a surface-to-air missile in the back of their car, with a man-pad in the back of their car. The belief, self-evident amongst Western leaders. I used to say this to British prime ministers at Prime Minister's Question Time. Did you read Frankenstein all the way to the end? Because if you had, you would realize that these monsters you keep creating, in the end, move outside of your control, out with your ability to control it. And the law of unintended consequences, David, is a very powerful law. Thanks for the call. We've got lots more coming up. Let's see. Chanrai Bishop says, "You sound like a madman." Really? You're basically arguing that the Ukrainians do not have a right to exist. Me? There are many nations around the world that don't have a large military. Actually, Ukraine has a massive military, 450,000 strong. It was only 120,000 in 2014, so it's tripled nearly in size in just 8 years. I wonder why. I wonder how. Based on what you're saying, a more powerful country has the right to just attack them and take them over. I'll tell you what, Mr. Chanrai Bishop, you're going to need to call me and argue this out, man to man. 08081 965522. Come and have a go. If you think you're hard enough, we'll see who's the madman when you call. Let's go to Washington, D.C., talk with John. John, welcome to the show.
Hello, George. Thank you. I'm honored.
Welcome. You're welcome. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, it's just crazy seeing the media blackout here in the United States. I happened to read 1984 for the first time a couple months ago, and I was struck thinking about it afterwards, about how it's assigned to high school students here, at least back in the day. And I think it was as a warning for like Soviet or Russian communism and authoritarian government. But now, from my perspective here, growing up in the United States, for me, it was like I finished the book thinking like I felt like I had just been subjected to an MK Ultra experiment or something. And to me, it spoke out against none other than American government. And now with the media blackout, having to cut through all the mass media lies and false coverage to get any semblance of the truth, it's like playing Sudoku. And it's just crazy to look from the perspective that we're at now and see that 1984, I mean, was written about us, the United States, you know. We are the ones.
He didn't intend that to be the case, but that's how it has turned out. 1984 was supposed to be a novel, not a manual, but the manual is in full application now, particularly in your country and in mine increasingly. In fact, your country and mine are effectively becoming one, albeit in the words of Oscar Wilde, one divided by a common language. But our rulers are on the same page, so we might as well be on the same page too in how we try to get liberty and freedom back again. John, thanks very much for that excellent call. Now the poll, 9,000 people, that must be a record, have voted, and you've still got 15 minutes or so left. Should Hunter Biden be in jail? A, yes. B, no. You can vote on my Twitter, on my YouTube channel, and on my Telegram channel. But I've got to go to my next question, which is Fifi LaRue. I can't get her out of my mind. The movie Wuthering Heights premiered in Los Angeles this week in 1939. Who wrote the book? Emily Bronte, Charlotte Bronte, or Elizabeth Bronte? Great question, actually. I'll be back after this break.
Time, weather, and always. Let's play a game, and I'll ask you yes or no questions. Ready? Okay, then. Sick and tired of hearing the same old voices on the wireless? Are you looking for an alternative opinion to the mainstream media? Do you have a thing for a Scottish accent? If your answer is no to one or more of these questions, then you need the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway. Listen, watch, and share the fastest growing political program in the world.
It's for you, sir. Where's the cheese pizza, Robinson? Come on, what are the public paying you for? Oh, and get another virgin colada while you're there. There's a good chap. No, who's ringing the old burner phone? Hello? How did you get this number, Ghislaine? No, that's impossible. I can't possibly fly to New York. Why? Our mummy's grounded me. Oh, yes. Starting to cut off my allowance, you know. Yes, I know it comes from the public, but she holds the strings. Oh, I've got to go. My pizza will be here any minute. I'm not sweating, you're sweating. Ghislaine, don't call again. Robinson? Sir? Come here with that moist towelette. It's getting a bit hot for my liking.
Here? Where am I?
Welcome to St. Peter's Gate, my son.
Is this one of that Hillary's tricks, that devil?
Be still, my son. The Clintons cannot hurt you here. You are safe with me in heaven.
Oh, heck. Knew I shouldn't have taken Bob's homemade vaccine. Oh, Lord have mercy. I am not worthy.
Before you pass on, you may ask any question you desire.
Anything?
With my omniscient knowledge, I can tell you anything you wish to know.
Well, Lord, you gotta tell me. All-powerful creator of this universe, before you judge me, I've been searching for answers my whole life.
Yes, my child.
I have to know. Who shot JFK?
Another one. It was a lone gunman by the name of Lee Harvey Oswald. He was not a government agent, and there was no second shooter on that grassy knoll in Dallas.
My God! This goes higher up than we thought!
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Now, my good friend Shenol, who's organising the Killing Kelly film shows, not only did he sell out the Liverpool show a month before showtime, which is next week, he's just told me that the Oxford showing in Oxford Town Hall, which is next month, has already sold 48 tickets. So actually, hotcakes, they're going like hotcakes. If you want to come and see me in the Oxford Town Hall, make sure that you get your tickets quickly. The answer was Emily Bronte. It was neither Charlotte Bronte nor Elizabeth Bronte. It was Emily Bronte. And news about the podcast, maybe I'll take Richard in Woking first, shall I? Richard, I've kept you waiting long enough. Go ahead, sir.
Hi, George. Good evening, and thanks for having me on the show. I really appreciate it.
Welcome.
Yeah, you know, I've been watching this Ukrainian crisis for some time now, really pretty much from when it started, obviously, and I've been doing hundreds of hours. I do mean hundreds of hours of research, because it just sort of caught my interest. Can't explain why, but it did.
Good. I wish everyone did, Richard.
and I think that, long story short, I've really had a red pill moment, and it's been quite terrifying in a way, because I've actually thought a lot of my friends, a lot of my people, the people that I know, in fact, virtually all of them, apart from I think one, are all going along with the whole, what you see in the news, evil Putin is destroying Ukraine, is killing millions of people, blah, 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 it's got to be stopped. One of my friends said that we should send in the troops, even though, obviously that would cause, World War III. Let's go and, let's join in and let's get stuck in. I was then looking at the sanctions that they imposed, and it's sort of started off with you thought, oh, we'll impose some sanctions and we'll deter Putin and send a clear message. And then I'm realizing that aside from, instead of applying a couple of sanctions, we seem to be throwing the kitchen sink and then the whole kitchen at him. And we've thrown, I think, literally everything we've got. And we've actually tried to destroy the Russian economy and probably the Russian nation. And then I'm looking into that and thinking, I then did some research on the central banker of Russia. I think it's a lady, and she's highly respected apparently. And she gave a speech, I don't know, about like a week ago, and basically said that they think they can mitigate the sanctions, and they're going to do this, that, and the other, and they can get around it, and Russia will come out sort of stronger. It obviously will, cause an impact, and it will cause, damage to the economy, but they think that they can endure it. And with all of that, I've then been doing all of this research into, why are we in this position, and why is the West so keen to basically just send in incredible amounts of weapons into the country? Why are they not trying to achieve a peace deal? Why are they not focusing on the peace deal? And you're in the UK like I am, and I'm getting very tired and frustrated with seeing Boris Johnson going on TV and, comparing it to Brexit and shouting and screaming about how bad Russia are and how we must finish them off, and, Putin must fail and all this kind of rubbish. And then I realised, sort of looked a bit deeper into it all, and then I thought, well, the Americans seem to be sort of piling in on it as well, thinking it's all great to sort of supply more and more weapons to a war that ultimately I don't think the Ukrainians can win. I think the best thing is for them to sit around the table and negotiate a peace deal. And then again, I looked into it, and I believe Putin the Russian government spelt out their terms about 3 weeks ago and said, look, this is what we want, sort of thing. But it seems that, long story short, I think the West is not just supporting, which is obviously great, let's support the Ukrainians in their resistance or whatever, but they seem to be encouraging this war, making things worse.
They're ready to, Richard, they're ready to fight to the last drop of Ukrainian blood. They're not ready to fight themselves. The British and the Americans and NATO will never join this fight, because they know that this fight will quickly escalate to World War III, to a nuclear world war. And however stupid Boris Johnson and Joe Biden look, wiser counsel in the military and in the deep state have no intention of entering World War III, because it would be the end, fan. The rest of it is just moonshine, because not only will Russia survive the sanctions, the people imposing the sanctions have dropped a huge stone on their own feet, and it's our people that are already paying the price at the petrol pumps, in the gas bills, in the food costs, and in the inflation basket, and in the banking crisis that will be brought on by all of this. So the idea that you're destroying Russia is simply fanciful. Russia is food self-sufficient. Russia is energy self-sufficient. Russia has the vast hinterland, the biggest country in the world, 11 time zones, and it has an alliance, an ironclad alliance, with the two most populous countries in the world, China and India, and other countries like Iran, like Venezuela, which are energy rich and are in close alliance and coordination with Russia. So it's all moonshine, Richard. We've been led over the cliff by Joe Biden. What's wrong with us that we were led over a cliff by a man that is to be found wandering the corridors of the White House in his pajamas, drooling, having toilet accidents in front of the Pope, and we're following him? What's wrong with us? That's what I say. Richard, thanks for the call. Now, news from the podcast. In the past week, we've had our biggest numbers yet. Believe it or not, we've had more listeners this week on the podcast than we did in the previous 3 months. We are the top listened to alternative media political podcast in the world, charting in the political top 20 in the UK, Ireland, Spain, Italy, India, Russia, Germany, Belgium, Turkey, Denmark, Cyprus, Hungary, Qatar, Poland, Portugal, Nigeria, Egypt, the Philippines, Hong Kong, Thailand, Taiwan, Singapore, Sweden, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, and Israel. How about that then? For a guy from a council house in Dundee. We're quickly becoming one of the top political podcasts in China also. And we're still number one in Ghana, Oman, Namibia, Ecuador, Slovenia, Zimbabwe, Malaysia, but also now in Bulgaria and in Iceland. Now remember to subscribe to this podcasting phenomenon, like so many thousands now all over the world. Give us a 5-star review, please. Like Ali in the UK, who says simply the best. And hi George, I'm Hiba from London. I've been watching your show for the last few months and can say without hesitation that you're truly one of the best to show us reality which has been censored by the corrupt Rupert Murdoch and state-run media outlets. Carry on with your smart and hard work. May Allah bless you always. Best regards, Hiba in London. How beautiful is that? Thank you, Hiba. Thank you, Ali. Keith is in Grimsby. Let's hear from him. I don't often get up to Grimsby. Keith, last time I was there, I was on BBC Question Time along with a young backbencher called David Cameron. I wonder whatever happened to him.
I don't know. I never saw it.
Go ahead, sir.
Yes, I agree with all those callers. It's a wonderful show and it's very refreshing after all this sickening propaganda on the mainstream media.
Thank you, sir.
The main thing I'm ringing about, or two things in fact, my disappointment at losing RT. I've been watching it for many years now, and like you, I'm a big fan of Max Kaiser and his wife Tracy. Unlike you,
Thank God for them. Thank God for that.
I didn't take him up on his Bitcoin all those years ago.
Well, luckily I did. Luckily, I did, which is why I don't need any wages. I don't need any wages from anybody.
I won't ask you how much you've made. It'll spoil my night.
Well, $10. I bought them at $10. I bought them at $10, and I've got quite a lot of them. So you can do the maths.
I know. I can well imagine. Big regrets.
God bless. God bless.
Like I say, I've been watching RT for many years, and I've always found Lavrov and Putin quite reasonable, quite frankly.
Yeah, I mean, actually, when you compare them, compare Joe Biden and Antony Blinken to Putin and Lavrov, compare Boris Johnson and somebody called Liz Truss to Putin and Lavrov. You've got a gulf in class there. You've got a gulf in class there, Keith.
I know. Putin seems to have been bent over backwards to placate the West. And I've watched it diligently for many years now.
Too much. Far too much. Lavrov was right when he said this week that these sanctions are going to make us never again dependent on other people, never again to allow foreigners to be able to strategically damage our economy. We're going to ensure our independence now, and he said we should have done it long ago. And he was right.
Absolutely.
They should have done it.
Yeah, I've always found very decent people.
Look, Russia is a country that needs respect. That's all. And its security concerns to be addressed. That's all. We would insist upon it for ourselves. If Ireland or Scotland had foreign and hostile nuclear bases in them with rockets, including nuclear rockets, pointed at us, be sure we would insist upon it. If Mexico or Canada had hostile foreign military bases in them with rockets, including nuclear weapons, pointed at the United States, be sure the United States would do something about it. Last word to you, Keith.
Just two quick questions, George. You've mentioned recently that you wouldn't have voted for Putin, and I don't quite understand.
No, I'd have voted communist.
Voted for the alternative.
I'd have voted.
Why is that?
I'd have voted for the communist candidates because they would have acted sooner to ensure the independence of Russia, and because they would have less tolerance for the oligarchy, for the crony capitalists in Russia that the Putin has had. Now, Putin has cracked down on the oligarchs, but he needs to crack down more. Putin has made Russia strong again and recovered its prestige again. And I support Putin for that. But in domestic politics, I think that the changes that are required need to be implemented now. In this straitened and unusual time, we need a new Russia to emerge from these ashes. Whew, I've only got Richard Gage coming up. I'm only changing the subject to 9/11 after the news. Whew, with Elliot King. Stay tuned. Look at that poll. 9,600 votes have been cast. And it looks bad for you, Joe Hunter. You're off to jail.
Turkey's foreign minister, who is mediating peace talks between Ukraine and Russia, has said the two sides are close to an agreement. Mevlut Cavusoglu told the AFP news agency it is not an easy thing to come to terms with while the war is still going on, while civilians are killed. But he added, "We see that the parties are close to an agreement." Cavusoglu visited Russia and Ukraine this week, as Turkey has strong bonds with the two sides. He added that Turkey was in contact with the negotiating teams but refused to speak about the details of the talks. The two sides are negotiating on 6 key points, including Ukraine's neutrality, disarmament and security guarantees, the so-called denazification of the country and the removal of obstacles on the use of the Russian language in Ukraine. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has been criticised for comparing the struggles of Ukraine's fighting Russian invasion to people in Britain voting for Brexit. In a speech, he said Britons, like Ukrainians, had the instinct to choose freedom and cited the 2016 vote to leave the EU as a recent example. The comments have caused anger among politicians both in the UK and Europe. Donald Tusk, the former president of the European Council, called the comments offensive. Conservative peer Lord Barwell said voting in a referendum was not in any way comparable with risking your life in a war. However, Chancellor Rishi Sunak defended the Prime Minister, saying the two events were comparable. He said people will make up their own minds, but I certainly don't think those two situations are directly analogous. I don't think he does either. A memo sent across Whitehall before P&O Cruises sacked 800 of its staff tried to justify the decision, a newspaper report has claimed. The document said the company's now widely condemned move would ensure it remains a key player in the UK market for years to come through restructuring, the Sunday Times has said. Apparently written by a senior official, it talked about the re-employment of staff on the new terms and conditions and mentioned agency staff. I added that it would align P&O Ferries with other companies which had undertaken a large reduction in staff. Transport Secretary Grant Shapps received a copy and officials in his department knew of the redundancies on Wednesday, a day before the dismissals went ahead, the newspaper added. 6 people have been killed and 10 others seriously injured after a car driven at high speed slammed into a group of carnival performers in Belgium, says authorities. The vehicle hit people who had gathered at dawn on Sunday for the start of parade celebrations in the village of Strepu-Bakujeni, which is just about 30 miles south of Brussels. The vehicle hit people who had gathered at dawn on Sunday for the start of a parade celebration in the village of Strepu-Bakujeni, which is about 30 miles south of Brussels. The mayor of the neighbouring town of La Louvière, Jacques Gobert, told a local radio station a car drove from the back at high speed. We have a few dozen injured and unfortunately 7 people have been killed. The driver of the vehicle and a second person who were arrested when it came to a halt. Officers have denied media reports that the car may have been chased by police before the crash, and the incident did not appear to be a terror attack, according to prosecutors. The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge have arrived in Belize as demonstrations over land rights forced them to cancel their first big engagement of their tour. On Friday, it was announced that the royal couple would not be visiting a cacao farm in the village of Indian Creek on Sunday morning after protests from villagers. They were demonstrating after they were told the couple's helicopter would be landing on their football pitch. The village is also in a land dispute relating to ancestral land with Fauna and Flora International, a conservation group of which Prince William is patron. The state-owned oil giant Saudi Aramco plans to sharply increase the amount of its invests in energy production after it reported a doubling of profits in 2021. The firm aims to boost output significantly over the next 5 years. Energy prices have soared in recent months as demand has outstripped supplies of oil and gas. The war in Ukraine and a reluctancy to rely on Russia for energy has added that the pressure to find additional sources of energy. Saudi Aramco's move is likely to be welcomed by political leaders worried about the impact of high energy prices, although the boost to investment is aimed at increasing output over the course of the next 5 to 8 years. And finally, it's the game you may have never heard of, which is sweeping across the United States. It's had its origins 57 years ago when 3 fathers vacationing on an island near Seattle had a mini rebellion on their hands. Their kids were bored and they needed a summertime activity to keep them entertained. So the dads Joel Pritchard, Bill Bell and Barney McCallum got creative. They used the items at their disposal, including some ping-pong bats, an old badminton court, and a perforated plastic ball, and invented a new game for their kids to play, which that was called pickleball. With that, pickleball was born. From that humble start, the game has gradually evolved into a sport with official rules and better equipment. An estimated 4.8 million people in the US now play pickleball. Participation has increased by 39.3% in the past 2 years, making it the country's fastest growing sport, according to Laura Gaynor, a marketing consultant for the USA Pickleball Association, the sport's national governing body. There's a professional pickleball tour with some matches airing on ESPN. Pickleball aficionados are pushing for it to be included in the Olympics. It has apparently captivated such celebrities as talk show host Ellen DeGeneres, actor Leonardo DiCaprio, and philanthropist Bill Gates. The sport is basically a mashup of tennis, ping pong and badminton that can be played indoors or outdoors, single players or in pairs on a court the same size as a double badminton court but with a lower net. Are we likely to see pickleball at the next Olympics in Paris in 2 years' time? Well, if synchronised swimming and skateboarding can be included, why not? That's your Moats News. I'm Elliot King.
George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Join us at the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees.
Well, the first poll didn't go well for the power in the United States, overwhelmingly, and in their thousands, almost a record poll, nearly 10,000 people voted in just 2 hours. They believed that the deep state and the mass media and the Democratic Party and the political class had all been lying about the Hunter Biden laptop. And this is the problem, you see. The more you catch someone out lying, the less likely you are to believe them, even if they're telling the truth. Think about it. Try it in your own personal life. If you discovered your wife was lying to you, then even if she was telling you the truth, you quite likely would not believe her. Who are you going to believe, me or the evidence of your lying eyes? As one of the Marx brothers, I forget which, once said. And that's the problem too with the 9/11 narrative, as it is with the JFK narrative. Once upon a time, nearly everybody believed the official narrative on JFK. Now hardly anybody believes it. Once upon a time, although only briefly, the great majority of people believed the official narrative about 9/11, but that is no longer the case. More and more people are questioning it, including me. And that's both because of the powerful arguments made by the likes of my next guest this evening, but also because I discover that the people that want me to believe their official narrative are caught out as liars over and over and over again. Once bitten, twice shy, you know. Now, Richard Gage is a San Francisco Bay Area architect. He's a member of the American Institute of Architects, and he's the founder and former chief executive of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. That's all we want, isn't it, Richard? The truth.
Yeah, we're just looking for the truth, George. That's right. And I've been at it for 15 years after creating Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, which now has 3,500 architects and engineers signed on to the petition demanding a new investigation into the destruction of all 3 World Trade Center skyscrapers on 9/11.
Summarize the prevailing view amongst your 3,500. What is it that they doubt, and why do they doubt it?
Well, I think, George, it starts with World Trade Center Building 7. I mean, this is a 47-story skyscraper that on the afternoon of 9/11, after witnesses hear explosions, suddenly drops straight down uniformly, symmetrically into its own footprint in under 7 seconds. This is free fall acceleration. That's as fast as a bowling ball falling out of the sky. That means, and these architects and engineers know this, that all 80 columns had to have been removed at once in order for it to fall without any resistance from any one of them.
That's always been the most puzzling aspect. One could talk about the Pentagon, the weirdness of the story about the Pentagon building, but Building 7 is on the face of it inexplicable, isn't it?
Yeah, it is absolutely inexplicable because it's the official story. NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, 7 years later, came out with a report. And in the report they said, well, it came down due to normal office fires. Well, office fires have never brought down a steel frame fireproof skyscraper in history ever. It just doesn't happen. And yet on 9/11, we have not 2, but 3 protected, fire-protected steel frame buildings falling out of the sky. This should be the most studied building failure in history. Remember, no plane hit this building, and most architects and engineers don't even know about the 3rd worst structural failure in modern history. This is a completely unprecedented event. It should be news throughout the world, and yet it was swept under the rug by our mainstream media and by the associations of professional engineers and architects. I'm a member of the American Institute of Architects. They have 90,000 members. We didn't receive one bulletin on this incredible structural failure. And yet we, the architects, are the ones who specify the fireproofing for these buildings. And they were fireproofed, all of them, including Building 7, which wasn't hit by a plane. In the Twin Towers, they say that the fireproofing was knocked off by the plane.
That's the key point. We'll turn to the Twin Towers in a minute, but let me launch this poll, Richard. The poll is simple. Do you believe the official 9/11 account? A, yes. B, no. You can vote on my Twitter account, on my YouTube channel, and on my Telegram channel. But that's the key point. Building 7 was not struck by an aeroplane. So how could it fall like flat as a pancake in its own footprint from quote-unquote normal office fires? And if the story about Building 7 is less than the truth, perhaps even flatly untrue, that of course in a knock-on effect calls into question the official narrative of the Twin Towers themselves, doesn't it?
Necessarily it does. And when we look at the forensic evidence in the aftermath of all 3 buildings, we find the evidence of ignited and unignited incendiaries. Now, most of this is provided from official sources, like, for instance, OSHA and FEMA themselves, which document extreme temperatures way beyond what jet fuel or office fires can produce. Those are about 500 degrees Fahrenheit to 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, double that. Cut that in half for Celsius. But what we have is the documentation of 2,800 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 1,500 Celsius, and in the forms of molten iron, molten steel, again and again. The structural engineers, the World Trade Center structural engineer himself, Leslie Robertson, talking about a river of steel flowing. This is documentation of the effects of thermite, as FEMA does in their Appendix C in 2002, which they have a metallurgical examination in the Appendix C, which documents hot sulfur corrosion attack on the steel, a liquid molten iron invading the grain boundaries of the steel. Hot sulfur, where does the sulfur come from? Where does the molten iron come from? Well, that's the byproduct of thermate. Thermate is an incendiary used by the military to cut through steel like a hot knife through butter. And Jonathan Barnett says the ends of the beams were partly evaporated. He's the author of a substantial portion of the final report on the FEMA report. But NIST came in 2002, took over the investigation, threw out the metallurgical report, threw out the evidence of explosions at all three towers by hundreds of witnesses, particularly in the case of the Twin Towers. Explosions, they say, running under, like a train running under my feet. Explosions like pop, pop, pop. They say, like, you know, when there's a controlled demolition, that's what I heard, all around the face of all four buildings. This is incredible. This is direct evidence, 156 of them, orally recorded a month after 9/11, produced and documented and published by the New York Times. The transcripts, they're absolutely haunting, with the overwhelming majority of them, along with newscasters that day, on the day of 9/11, talking about this being an explosion-based event. This is very well documented by Professor Graham McQueen and produced by Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. But then the next day, the narrative changed when the mainstream media came in, and they call it the steel weakened due to the incredible heat from the jet fuel fires. Well, jet fuel doesn't burn any hotter than 300 degrees Celsius, according to its own manufacturer, ME Petroleum, in open air. So the official story can't possibly account for the incredible temperatures, but nor can it account for what the U.S. Geological Survey and R.J. Lee, an independent firm, environmental consulting firm, they do studies on the dust, and what do they find? Well, about 6% of the dust samples, in many of them, and all of the dust samples have this characteristic feature of previously molten iron microspheres. That's the documentation of a clear evidence of the use of thermite. Thermite produces molten iron, and in microspheres, if there's an explosive pressure wave. And so these are almost small to the naked eye, and the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, says this is characteristic of the dust. It's what creates uniquely the identification of the World Trade Center dust from common office building dust, and yet none of them know where these could have came from. But you do a controlled experiment and you find what?
I know that you don't go into who might have done this. People will speculate and even draw their own conclusions about that. Could have been the terrorists, could have been somebody else. But that the official story doesn't add up in architectural and engineering terms is pretty powerful, I've got to say. I've spoken to you before about it. You helped to change my mind, and you are continuing to do so. I don't go all the way with you, but you are raising questions that are so profound as to be, never mind scientifically, but politically extremely important. It's a bit like, you know, when I was a kid, I was a very, very ardent lover of Jack Kennedy. I grew up believing the story that a lone gunman, Lee Harvey Oswald, had killed him with incredible marksmanship from a window in a high building beside him, until we saw the Zapruder film, which clearly shows Kennedy also being shot from the front, after which you can't unsee that. And the the official narrative effectively begins to unravel. Then you ask the question, why did they insist on that official narrative when so much evidence exists that contradicts it? Do you feel you're getting anywhere on that in the way that Kennedy theorists have gotten?
Yeah, I think one of the Zapruder films of the 9/11 movement is the peer-reviewed study in the Bentham Open Chemical Physics Journal, for instance, by a team of 8 international scientists led by Niels Harrit in Copenhagen, which finds curious red-gray chips in all the dust samples that they collected. They're fluid applied because they're dual layered. They have the ingredients because they are attracted to a magnet. They're full of iron, and so they do a nuclear microscope test, and they find at 50,000 power magnification the ingredients of thermite, iron oxide, and aluminum powder. This is an incredible finding in 2009. That's been unchallenged by the official narrative or by debunkers. They say, oh, that's just paint. But paint doesn't have the exotic properties that does what? That in a big heater, a differential scanning calorimeter, it ignites and produces what? It produces molten iron microspheres with the same chemical signature as the molten iron microspheres found by the USGS and R.J. Lee. So this is a self-corroborating set of repeatable experimental data that could put a lot of people away for mass murder and treason. And there's no statute of limitations. And that's why in the UK right now, we have a brave family member, Matt Campbell, who has submitted a petition, an inquest into the death of his brother who was murdered in the North Tower. And this has gone to the Attorney General in the UK, and it's got preliminary stages of approval for a re-inquest into not only his death, but the death of many others. There's 1,100 people for whom we have no trace of in the World Trade Center towers. That is not a progressive collapse, as they have told us. This is a very explosive event where 90% of the steel, comprising a third of the weight of this building, is distributed laterally at 600 feet in every direction at 80 miles an hour. And the concrete, 90,000 tons of concrete pulverized into powder, like baby powder, distributed in a 3 square mile area about Manhattan. Well, that's 2/3 of the weight of the building. It's not available to crush the building. What you see in the photos is not the top part crushing the bottom part. What you see is an incredibly explosive event, and we document that in our video free on YouTube, 9/11 Explosive Evidence Experts Speak Out. And it's on the website, richardgage911.org.
Thank you, Richard. A pleasure talking to you again. Definitely not so much food for thought as a banquet for thought. Richard Gage of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. Now, we'll go to calls, but let me tell you again about the poll. Do you believe the official 9/11 account? Yes, 19% on Twitter. No, 81%. On YouTube, yes, 9%. No, 91%. And on Telegram, yes, 6%. No, 94%. Shall I go straight to Ray in Liverpool? Ray in Liverpool, I'll see you next week. Ray, at least I'll see Liverpool next week. Very nice to hear from you. Go ahead, sir.
Oh, Liverpool's a very lovely city, George.
Oh, don't I know it. Big heart. City with a big heart.
People.
Yeah, absolutely so.
Yeah,
Tell me.
I wanted to talk about like the Ukrainian and the Russia war. I always say, George, is that I don't think we should be taking in like refugees into our own home. I think it's a little bit insane that Boris Johnson is going to offer £300 and something, isn't he?
Go on.
Yeah, I think it's just not good because you can't really you don't know who these people are, like taking in a Ukrainian refugee in. I think that's... Well,
you don't know who any refugee is. That's part of the problem. And when you then distribute them across the country, you are potentially distributing, as we did in Manchester, with the Manchester Arena bomber, you are potentially distributing people with intention to harm you. So you have to be extremely careful, and there are little sign of care and attention to this question, either from the people coming across the channel or the Ukrainian people that will end up here. I suspect that there will not be many Ukrainians come here. Most of them will, I hope, go back to the Ukraine. You heard on the news just a few minutes ago, Turkey feels that the two sides are close to an agreement. So it could be that by next week's show, the war has ended. And I hope that refugees will return. Those who don't return are much more likely to want to remain close to their country, close to their culture and family, and will find themselves in countries like Poland, which of course partly used to be the same country. Last word to you, Ray.
Yeah, I agree what you're saying, George. I say like even like other countries are thinking, why is Britain taking in like refugees like into their own home? They're thinking like we're a bit nuts, aren't we?
Well, there's mass psychosis going on. It'll be studied. Books will be written about it. PhDs will be written about it. It's how at least half, maybe 3/4 of the whole country went mad in the month of February, in the year of our Lord 2022. How, like Pavlov's dogs, they were fooled, they were hoodwinked. The truth will out, you know, whether it's Jack Kennedy, 9/11, or the story of what really happened in Ukraine. The truth will out, Ray. Can't wait to get to Liverpool next week. Question 5, I'm told, I have to take. In this week, in 1953, Dr. Jonas Salk announced that he had successfully tested a vaccine to prevent which disease? A, smallpox, B, polio, C, leprosy. Answer after a quick break. Peter says the Afghan people have lost, George. I thought you were better than this, to be honest. Give me a call, Peter. Tell me what you mean. And Oliver says, for some reason, George was on the jihadist side when it came to Yugoslavia. And that's the reason I will never trust him. I fought against the war on Yugoslavia with all my breath and all my heart. Me and Tony Benn and Jeremy Corbyn and others were practically the only people in this country opposing the war on Yugoslavia, the destruction of Yugoslavia. How dare you, you imbecile? If you have any guts, you'll pick up the phone right now and call this show and justify that utter slander. Really. And Yoda says, love the show. Best entertainment and education on the airwaves.
Team on it. Ignition. Liftoff. Liftoff. 30 minutes after the hour.
We need to acclimatise the public for the introduction of extraterrestrials, because come to the conclusion at this point. If they're going to come, they are going to come soon.
Back in the late 60s and early 70s, they actually saw the saucer land in front of them or pass by in New York or go overhead.
It went in front of my eyes up and turned into what looked like a star way up in the sky.
They said the same line that you just made, and it was amazing. It is an awful waste of space if we are all that there is.
If we're all that there is. Exactly. Have you ever seen any of these phenomena?
I have seen energy entities. One looked like a massive jellyfish. The other one looked like a massive centipede.
Well, you had me up to that point. Now I just think you're stark raving mad.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
I shouldn't really say things like that, stark raving mad, should I? It's very politically incorrect. He was bonkers, but stark raving mad. Anyway, the answer was polio. Now, this was in 1953. By the way, this man made not a penny out of the polio vaccine that he gave to the world. Now, I grew up, I was born in 1954, so I grew up, as it were, under the shadow of polio. Pictures of children growing up in an iron lung, it was called. Even the very name of it was terrifying. People in like an iron coffin with just their head sticking out of one end. Polio crippled people. People used to see them. They were polio victims, used to see them. And this vaccine, which was first an injection, then later a sugar lump. I remember queuing for the sugar lump. So this would be in the late 50s. So God bless the memory of Dr. Jonas Salk. Remember, you can vote right up to the end of the show on our official 9/11 account. Question: do you believe in it? Yes or no? It's really a binary question, that, you know. Now, David McBride is one of my favorite soldiers. He is a brave soldier, a clever one, a military lawyer who blew the whistle on war crimes allegedly carried out by members of the Australian military. Instead of putting the war criminals on trial, they decided to put David on trial instead, and we are keeping a careful track on what's happening to him, and we also want to hear his take on what's happening in the Ukraine. I'm glad to say he joins us again now. David McBride, thank you very much for joining us. Let's start with your own situation, if we may, because many of our viewers are very keen to know how the persecution of you currently stands.
It's still going ahead. I'm facing trial in September and a jury trial probably in 2023. We are making significant inroads. I've got a documentary about my life coming out quite soon, which I think will help build support. And there is a big defamation case going on where one of the soldiers accused of war crimes ended up suing the newspapers and for calling him a war criminal. But now about 20 witnesses have come in and said he's a war criminal. Whether he is or not, I don't know. But it looks like he's going to lose that case. And that will be, if he does, that will be an important advantage for me, because it will, increasingly the noose will be tightening around the government's neck to say, how come you've got this guy on trial, a bit like Julian Assange's case, when everything he said was true? Do you not like truth? Do you not like being exposed? What is the problem? Is it simply because he embarrassed the government?
It is a very powerful argument. I pray to God that it prevails. But of course, the precedent of Julian Assange and Stephen Donziger is not great. Despite my thinking that the Australian government would be very foolish indeed to proceed with a trial against you, the precedent of Julian and Stephen is that even when it's very foolish, they continue to do very foolish things.
Yes, and that's what I'm relying on to a certain extent. It's a bit like the bully in the playground. I mean, the way to counterintuitive, but the way, as we all know, and as you did to the Americans back in 2003, the way to deal with a bully is to confront them because they don't think like you or me. And we wouldn't be in such a bad situation if the way our governments act is not so devoid, so completely different to the way you and I act. They will probably almost certainly continue on with my trial to the very bitter end in the same way that this soldier sued for defamation, even though it was a bad thing to do. We had another politician who sued for defamation over some serious allegations, and again it blew up in his face. And you would have thought any rational person would have said, don't go there, you've got so many skeletons in your closet. But they don't think like that. And the government, they may drop the case on the court steps because they will be very worried about generals having to come in without their spin doctors, without their friendly newspaper editors, and actually answer the very hard question, did you know about the war crimes? And if not, how is that not incompetence?
And if so, etc., etc. Now, everyone watching will wish you well in your case. How can people help you? How can they stay in touch with what's happening on the case?
I have a Twitter account. I have a website, davidmcbride.com.au. I have a GoFundMe for anyone that's got it to throw the price of a cup of coffee. Everyone's doing it tough, but a small amount, which is called 50 years in prison for whistleblowing on the ADF. So I'd be very grateful, and messages of support can be sent there too. But I always love on your program. I know your viewers know what's really going on in the world, and it's always great to see you.
You're right. This is the best educated television audience in the whole world. They're not students at the Open University of the airwaves for nothing. David, as I've got you here, let me ask you something that doesn't really compute with me. I see Australia almost daily threatening China on behalf of a power at the other end of the world, whilst China is your neighbour. And Australia's not remotely in a position to fight China. China is your major trading partner. Why has this Australian government allowed itself to be a kind of cat's paw against China? What's going on there?
Look, I totally agree, George. It is embarrassing for me as an Australian. And my grandparents and parents would be ashamed too. We fought to keep Australia independent. We are now a totally owned subsidiary of the United States. There is no Australia as far as foreign affairs goes anymore. We joined the war in Afghanistan on exactly the same day as the Americans. We left the war in Afghanistan on exactly the same day as the Americans. The funny thing is they still maintain some sort of facade of independence. It's a joke. We are not independent of the US anymore. It's very apparent in relation to China. it was only about 3 years ago that we were, as you said, had very close relations with China. Chinese naval ships sailed into Sydney Harbour and docked at our naval. They docked at our naval, docks. Nothing major has changed since then, except the Americans, Pompeo and his buddies, have told us we have to hate China. So now we hate China because we've been told to. And even though it was crazy for us because they were our biggest trading partner, and they suddenly went to being an enemy. And it's all right for the Americans because they're the Americans' natural trading enemy. But they were our natural trading partner. And this is why our government has sold our people down the river. We have lost so many trading opportunities with China. And for what? To make the Americans happy. And no one kind of thinks about it. The point of American foreign policy is to make America richer. It's not to make Australia richer. And yet our politicians haven't cottoned on to that, or perhaps even more sinister, so nefarious as American influence in Australia that a bit like a lot of other smaller countries around the world, you cannot get elected as a leader unless the American intelligence organisation give you the thumbs up. And that's quite a scary thing. I mean, to think that our own leaders, and there's been allegations of this, have to be approved by the Americans, otherwise they're gone. Now
it's almost incredible, almost impossible to believe. If it wasn't coming from you, I wouldn't believe it. Major McBride, thanks for joining us once again, and the best of luck in your campaign. So the vote is strong for a second-hour poll. My goodness, over 4,000 people have voted. It's not good news for the official channels in the United States. Let's hear from Ollie in London on the Ukraine. Go ahead, Ollie.
Hi, George. Good evening.
Good evening, sir.
Can you hear me?
Yes, the whole world's listening. Go ahead.
Okay, great. So I wanted just to make one or two comments on the Russia and Ukraine situation. So yeah. I totally get from Russia's point of view that the fact that it was almost impossible for them to allow Ukraine to join NATO because America would never allow it, because that would technically be saying, if there was a kind of Russia and NATO, that would basically be saying Mexico or Canada, to be in a kind of Russia and NATO, which America would never allow, of which America never did, America didn't allow for Cuba. Hence why we had
exactly. We nearly had World War III over Cuba, which is 90 miles away, an island in the Caribbean.
Yes, exactly. But I think the invasion of Ukraine goes beyond just the NATO thing, because if you watch the statement by Putin in the days before the invasion and the week after, whereby he says he maintains by what he said in that speech that as far as is concerned, Russia and Ukraine are the same people, they are the same nation, and he was sort of even blaming Lenin for the creation of Ukraine. But but that may all well be true to Putin. But it's up to Ukrainian people to decide whether they and Russia are one nation or not. And this invasion is now going to do the exact opposite. There's now no future whereby Ukrainians and Russians are going to have a love-lost, there's going to be a love-lost relationship.
Well, no, you're at least half of the people of Ukraine before the war wanted and expressed regularly in opinion polls, wanted good relations with Russia. In fact, were preferred for Ukraine to be neutral, neither east nor west. And that was a sensible conclusion that they reached. And of course that may have increased or it may have decreased as a result of what has happened since. But the Russians do not want to take over Ukraine. the war aims do not involve the two countries becoming one, Ollie.
No, but like I said, but if you watch the speech by Putin himself, whereby he says...
I watched it twice.
Yeah, exactly. Whereby he says that as far as it's concerned, Russia and Ukraine are one nation, you know.
Well, that was the case. That was the case for a millennium. That has the benefit of being true.
It was, but currently it's no longer true. And for him to say...
But he accepts that. No, look, Ollie, you're wrong. You're wrong. The Minsk agreement, which Russia supported, but unfortunately Ukraine did not implement, involved Ukraine retaining a state on exactly the borders that it always had since the end of the Soviet Union. As long as a special status could be granted to the Russian-speaking people in what is now known as the independent republics of Lugansk and Donetsk. Am I right or wrong?
No, but it's still not relating to the point I said. Like Putin himself said that as far as it's concerned, presently, Russia and Ukraine are one nation. Like he said that in the TV address, and then he doubled down to say, but that is not going to change his conviction that the two of them are the same nation.
Well, that is overwhelmingly the view of the Russian people and of the Ukrainian people. They were 400s. Listen, if you look at the Last Tsars documentary on Netflix, you'll see that the Queen Mother of Russia lived where? In Kiev. Not in eastern Ukraine, in western Ukraine. In Kiev, that was where the royal palace was.
Well,
it was, as I myself said, Ollie, earlier in the show, it was Lenin, it was the Bolsheviks. Actually, it was Stalin's policy on the nationalities that created anything called Ukraine. Before that, it was a part of Russia, and half of it was a part of Poland.
Indeed, but again, you can't go back in time and unfix that. The nation has been created.
Nobody wants to go back in time. Let's hope that there's a peace deal agreed this week, Ollie, and come back and talk to me next week. Let me get through some of the social media because I've never had more. Razmataz says Liz Truss told UK nationals to go and fight in Ukraine against international law. And many of these citizens who did are probably dead now after Russia's missile strikes. Well, that is actually true. Mercenaries are being specially targeted. Nobody wants a mercenary. It was a gross error of judgment on the part of Liz Truss to encourage them. And Bushman says the sanctions will hinder the West more than Russia. China and India alone are nearly 40% of the world's population. Nyla says Julian Assange is getting married on Wednesday at Belmarsh Prison. Come there and celebrate at 1 p.m. If any of you can be at Belmarsh Prison on Wednesday at 1 p.m., go and let Mr. and Mrs. Assange hear you outside. And Nicolaj, Nicolaj, says it's important to understand that intelligence often waters down the real narrative with conspiracy theories. While people talk about the towers, the real story is the lie to go to war. See COVID, not eugenics, but infrastructure of a checkpoint society. And late to the party says, after the last 2 years, I don't take official accounts of anything at face value anymore. Sad to say that even though I'm naturally skeptical, cynical, my husband says, I've generally trusted authority, not anymore. This is the problem for the powerful and for the media that serve them. Nobody believes you anymore, even when you're telling the truth. Let me go to Georgia. I think the U.S. state of Georgia, rather than the Republic of Georgia. Let's hear Chris in Georgia. Hi, Chris. Hi.
Hello?
Yes.
Yes. This is my first time calling in. Nice meeting you.
You, brother, go ahead. Go ahead.
I just had a question. Like, my job has me paying attention to geopolitics now. So now I'm watching and I'm paying attention to what's going on. I just got a question. So the way I read in the paper today that the United States sanctioned Russia's millionaires, I guess billionaires, that took the yachts or something, and they just held them just because they was Russians. So would Russia and China be able to do the same thing to the United States, like by raising taxes on products they import here, or just any other way that they would be able to do it?
Russia is answering sanctions one by one and will continue to do so. Although I did see that the Russian government declared, contrary to what I'd heard about McDonald's and so on, that Russia would not nationalize foreign assets. That's up to them. It's their business. If I was in charge, I definitely would. But they've said that they respect private property in a way that the capitalist states, which are supposedly built on the rights of private property, clearly do not. Now, I have spent all of my life, Chris, looking forward to the day when the expropriators were expropriated. But not just some expropriators, and not just some oligarchs, not just some people's yachts. The world's divided into the have-nots and the have-yachts. Well, let's build a country, let's build a society where the first man can see the last man, and the last man can see the first man. And nobody should have yachts worth hundreds of millions of pounds when other people have their backside hanging out of their trousers and their children don't have enough to eat and their water is dirty and their wife dies in childbirth. Let's have a more balanced and fair world. But that will require not just taking the yachts of Russians, not just expropriating the big mansions of Russians, the companies owned by Russians. That will require a wholly different kind of society to the one that we have got now. Chris, thanks for that. Not a great line, but a great call. And Geraint Walters says, Mr. Galloway, I wanted to tell you I'm grateful beyond expression for the work you do. Yours and your team's relentless pursuit of truth and equality has shaped my adulthood in ways I'm eternally grateful for. Thank you, sir. The situation in Ukraine is a symptom of a greater global corruption that is endemic in our society. Our government has put the wealth of a few above all human life at the cost of millions in Iraq, Syria, Iran, Yemen, Palestine, to name but a few. They're ready to fight to the last drop of everyone else's blood. Blessings to all and a safe night to all of humanity. Amen. Thank you for that. Let's go to Zal in Edinburgh. Go ahead, Zal.
Hi, good evening, George. Pleasure to be in your show. Watch it every week and midweek there as well. And I'm glad you've not been put off air yet by the...
We'll never be off air. We're not Russian state media. They can't stop us. We'll be back on Wednesday at 7 o'clock, Zal. Make sure you tune in on Wednesday.
You don't worry, I'll watch it. George, just a couple of things. I agree with you a lot of things, but sometimes I don't agree. You make me laugh, you make me cry sometimes, and it's good to watch anyway. The thing about one of your callers, Simon, saying that the SNP hate the English or words to that effect, well, that's not true. I don't know why. I mean, you stand for democracy and things like that, and you're against the SNP. You've got your own party, which is good. Workers' Party. It's probably better than the piece of wood Labour and the corrupt Tories. In fact, all of Westminster and London Rule is Tory corrupt. And the fact is, we're lucky we've got the SNP here, because after Blair, Labour was finished, right? And, after Maggie Thatcher, the Tories were done here. So, I wish you could say, well, I don't like the SNP or Nicola Sturgeon or independents, but, I'll have the respect for the people of Scotland to vote on that when it comes.
The problem for you, Zal, is the people of Scotland already voted. The people of Scotland voted in a once-in-a-lifetime or a once-in-a-generation referendum. Let me finish. It was the biggest turnout in any vote in the entire history of democracy in Scotland. Well over 80% of the people voted. They voted decisively, 55 to 45, which you'll recall was exactly the number that I predicted on Andrew Neil's BBC show on the Sunday before polling day on the Thursday. So I won a lot of money on that, Zal. That's how I remember that we've actually already voted. Now, we can't keep reopening this issue. We can't stay on a hamster wheel where everything is about whether or not we have another vote. And then, of course, if my side won it, Zal, if my side won it, you'd be agitating for a third, and then a fourth, and then a fifth referendum. Sorry, mate, and thanks for the kind words that you spoke. Now, I've got so many social media posts, I can't get to them, because I've virtually run out of time. But the good news is twofold. First, I'll be back again on Wednesday at 7 p.m. with Moats Extra. Don't miss it. And secondly, that Kenny in Acton, who's a legend, is on the line and here now. Go ahead, Ken.
Hello, George. Hi.
Good to hear from you again.
Hi, you too, man. I'm currently in quarantine in an American biolab in Whitechapel for a clinical trial for the flu vaccine.
Oh, wow. Wow, that's big of you, brave of you.
Yeah. And for only 2 weeks' work, they're going to pay me $3,500. That's not bad, eh?
Well, yeah, at least you're being compensated for it. But does that mean you've got to get the flu?
Yeah, they're going to inject me with the flu tomorrow.
I'm not. Well, you need to be hard up for the $3,000 to volunteer to get the flu.
I'm lucky. I've got a strong immune system. Yeah.
And what if you don't get? What if you don't get the flu? Will you still get the money?
Yeah.
Kenny, you're a real Scotsman. You're a real Scotsman. Only a Scotsman would volunteer to get the flu for $3,000. Kenny, get well soon. God bless you. And thank you very much indeed for getting that call in. Alas, although it's been marvellous for me, and I hope it was marvellous for you, we really have run out of time. But the good news is, we'll be back on Wednesday at the same time, same place. Join me then for Moats Extra.